How's it going, everybody? Just waiting a little bit here for Gabby to join us. So give us a second. How's everybody doing today? Gonna do some cloning talk, as well as probably some updates about Craft Growers Network, what Gabby and I are doing. So we'll see when we can get a few more people in here, and then we're just waiting for Gabby now. He'll be here shortly. Fat Freddy's cat, thank you. Yeah, we're happy to do these shows for you guys. It's been a lot of fun talking grow and talking about people, getting their stories out there. Yeah, indeed. Rip Ozzy. Man was a legend. It's a bummer. But kind of like very serendipitous with that last concert and everything. But who would have known? Feel free to tag us in any questions that you have. If you want to post any questions about cloning in the chat, we'll get to them as we get to them. We kind of have a little bit of a plan for the show, but it's not really set in stone yet. We're just trying this out. Cheers to everybody who's doing cuts right now. Yo, that's awesome. Sorry if I'm looking off screen here. I'm, broke boy streaming. Got my one laptop and my phone to monitor the chat and shit. We will figure this out though. I think I can do something different here. I think we're gonna talk a little bit about Callus tech and sort of the importance of it. If we don't get to that, make sure to tag us in a question later when we do start to talk about it, because I do want to bring it up because I know Gabby and I have conflicting views on it. We'll have to ask Gabby which sour he likes most. I'm not really sure. I think he does have some thoughts on the sours and the cuts and sort of everything that's been going on with that. So we will probably get to that and talk about that. All right, let's see if I can pop this chat out. All right, there we go. Pop out chat is dope. Yeah, the callus definitely forms before the root pops, unless it pops from the stem itself, in which there will still be like a hormonal formation and like the primordia formed, but it doesn't have the same sort of callus structure because it's not an open wound. But yeah, definitely need callus at the open wound. But we'll get into that. I'm gonna find out where Gaby is here though, so give me a second, y'all. Well, while we wait for Gaby, anybody in chat? What's new in your grow worlds? What have y'all been up to in your gardens? You know, I've actually had Kevtron. I've actually had better success cloning outdoor clones sometimes than indoor clones. They just seem really vigorous, especially if the plant's healthy. But yeah, I haven't had an issue. Fucking up russets this week. Ooh, Joshua Freeman. I am sorry to hear that. What russets are a rough one. I like sulfur for those, but not if they're already in flowers. So I don't. That's one of those ones where if you got them, maybe oils. But yeah, those are fucked. I bring it indoors, Kevtron. I'll just put them under like the normal T5 style LEDs, two per 4 foot by 18-inch rack, like just one of those normal wire metal racks that you can get. I use it with the Athena VP dome just because it's easier than using clone domes when you're doing them at numbers, but it works. Just under those, just apply the same hormones and whatnot. I think that Gaby and I use different hormones, and let's see. I like I like that you just get a lot of vigor out of the plants when they come from outside. Oh, if you haven't had russets, then that's crazy. They're bad if they're bad, but you can get them. I mean, you can take care of them. It's just you have to be really proactive about it. Oils, Bavaria Bassiana, sulfur works really well. You can't use oils and sulfur though together, so you got to choose one path or the other. And sometimes oils are better because you have access to mineral oils and other things like what azadiractins, so like neem oil based sprays and stuff in case you run into something else that you need to tackle that sulfur alone won't handle. So you got to choose one path or the other. But if you got russets and powdery mildew, sulfur's the way to go. I've dealt with that and it worked pretty well. Here he
What's
is.
funny?
We're live. We're doing it, dude. We're
We're
rocking.
live. Holy shit. Oh, can you hear me okay? Because I'm not using headphones.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Alrighty, let me just plug in my phone so we don't have a problem.
All right.
Actually, I forgot to shut off my phone so I don't get notifications. Hold on a second.
We already have quite the chat going, Gaby. So if you pull up your YouTube chat,
Yeah, I've got it.
the live is popping off already. Everybody's giving us some good questions. So
Nice.
but
Thank
I
you,
think
everybody, for joining us.
yeah, thank you everybody. but thank you. And I think we're gonna just get into some of the cloning methods. And I know Gabby kind of had you had a plan. You brought some stuff home with you to do some demonstrations.
I did.
And so I think, like, first and foremost, when we're talking about clones, because we've already had some good questions come up in the chat where people are asking, oh, can you clone an outdoor plant in an indoor plant in an indoor setting? I think that one of the key factors there that people are thinking about is like, how healthy do the moms need to be, and what does my cloning environment need to look like compared to where my mother plants are? And I feel like this is just super important when it comes to mother plant health in general. So, what are some of your thoughts on what your source plant material should look like?
I mean, honestly, Nick, I think you've got far more experience in this than me.
You've
Um,
got years. I might have volume, but you got
no,
years.
but I'm talking about going from outside plants to inside and the cloning.
Okay.
I I can't remember ever bringing clones from outside in.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, just because I've always done such a small amount of outdoor and greenhouse that what I would do is I would have my indoor clones and I would bring them outside to grow them.
Sure.
And I generally would never bring that material back inside because it's a lot harder to keep things clean.
Sure.
But my guess is that there's absolutely no problem bringing stuff from outside in. Besides, of course, the hygienic stuff that we just talked about.
Sure.
I think they're going to root just as if they were indoor and maybe even faster because
That's
outdoor grown plants can be so much healthier.
that's my experience is if you have a really healthy outdoor plant, you can bust roots really quick. And I think I think that the things to consider are just like you were talking about, how do you keep that plant material clean coming inside? So, like if you have an indoor setting, right, you should already be keeping up on your integrated pest management so that you don't have pest issues going into cloning. You can always, though, do washes and baths in that part if you do have any issues in the mother space. So, like, but if you're coming in from the outdoors, you have to be almost, you have to assume that you have pests, right? And one of the ones we were talking about before, especially like where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest, is russet mites, especially coming in from outdoors, especially during the summer season when your plants are vegetative, because there's just a whole bunch of shit that's like really prevalent, pathogen wise and pest pressure wise. So, one of the ways that you could go with russets is a sulfur dip, which I know that Gabby, you really like to use sulfur for your cloning process. Or you could go something with like a horticultural oil dip, or
Xerotol.
say that again.
Xerotol.
Xerotol, yeah. So if you have pathogen pressure, right, xerotol, something that oxidizes. And then if you have pest pressure, you want to use something like an oil or like sulfur or something, but you can't use oil and sulfur together. So we kind of already went over that a little bit earlier when people were bringing up russet mites, but what that would be like my precautionary measure if bringing in genetics from outdoors. I wouldn't bring a whole plant in from outdoors because then you
Well,
have the
like for
whole root
instance,
system to deal with.
if you don't have an indoor and you're just trying to bring plants inside to clone, then it's not nearly as much of a concern as if you'd be contaminating your clean indoor space. Hey, one thing I want to say real fast to the people asking questions is that I'm not able to like communicate with Nick and read all these questions. So, by all means, you guys should communicate in the chat and then we'll ask at a time, hey, now's a good time to put your questions in. And then I'll, because I don't want you to think I'm ignoring your questions and then you don't ask them later. But it's
No,
just
I
it's,
fucked up and told them to start asking questions. But if
okay.
you guys do have questions you want us to read, we'll go back through it. But if you could tag us in like the question, like tag the either Mr. Wolf Grows or I don't know, Gabby, are you in as Gabby Staten Island, or are you in as Craft Growers Network?
I'm not. I actually should log off on the chat and then log, but I wasn't planning on. responding typing anyway, so I don't think it matters what
Oh,
I'm
for
logged
sure.
on. I'm just gonna.
But if you tag, let's say if you tag me, Mr. Wolf Grows, then I should be able to at least go back through and read the questions off when we get to it,
What
whenever
I would
that
say, don't
may
be
be.
shy about asking again if 5, 10
Yeah,
minutes have gone and I haven't responded to your question. The chat is really going. But hey, you know what? I did see a question. Now that I said that I can't read them, but I did see a question which I think is really an important one. Someone said, "How do I avoid clones getting yellow in the cloning tray? Is it a light issue or the food?" And this is like one of the important things to learn when you're cloning. And I'm assuming that he's using a dome, right? And so my guess is that the reason why your clones are yellowing is because you have the dome on too long and too tight and they need more air. Okay. As you know, the way I do it is I'll start them off at a fairly high humidity. And I left my dome in the other room. I want to get it because I love my dome. Um, I'll have the dome. My dome has, you know what? Let me go get the dome right now. Go ahead and
go
entertain
for it.
me for a minute, Wolfie.
All right. Yeah. So what I'm pretty sure he's about to say is he starts high in humidity and then goes low over time. And with the yellowing, the way that I've experienced that is that the mother plant potentially didn't have enough nutrients initially, and so it could have gone in there with a little bit of poorer health. But you also then could have a lower nutrient availability than what the plant needs at what it's requiring for the photosynthesis. So like if your lights are too high, then you could also yellow out a little bit quicker. But I do think that what Gabby's about to explain is probably the most likely culprit.
So the first thing is, um, I don't I don't hawk products. We're not getting paid to, or currently we're not getting paid. If somebody wants to pay us to hawk their products, let us know. But
We'll
this is a
hawk something
product
that we
that,
like.
yeah, this is a product that I really believe in. Okay, and by the way, it looks dirty, but it's actually really clean. That's chlorine drops on it. But this dome has giant vents on the side, and then on both sides, and then it has one on the top.
Hmm.
Okay, and it's the only dome that I've seen like this. Other domes, they'll generally have like on the top a little circle thing that can open up three little holes, and they're tiny. And so, what we used to do when that was all that was available was we would, like crack the side of it, like prop it up with some pencils or something to get more air. But um, if you prepare your media properly with a little nutrient solution, as soon as those roots start coming out, they're going to have food, right? So the yellowing shouldn't be due to lack of food. Um, but what's going to happen is if you leave that dome on too long, they're going to yellow. And so what I tell people is, if your plants are dropping, they need more humidity. Okay. If they're not under a dome, or if you take the dome off too soon and they drop, it's because they're not rooting yet and they need more humidity. And um, if they're starting to yellow, it's because they're growing and rooting and they need more fresh air. And so you need to open up that dome more. You don't want to just go from sealed to removed, because then you can have an acclimation problem. Okay. And then that can stress them. But, the way I do it with this dome is, so when I start, the top will be totally closed, and then the sides I'll have halfway. I don't know how well you can see that.
Yeah.
And then on the second day, I already start cracking these openings up. Every day I'm opening up more and more so that I can get them acclimated to a drier environment. Um, and that way, by a week to 10 days, depending on what you're growing, I want that dome completely off. Okay. I try to start taking them off at around a week to 8 days. But when I take the dome off, I'm gonna watch them. If they instantly start to go like this, that means they're not ready yet, and that they still need a higher humidity. And what I'll do at that point is I'll spray them, generally with xylitol. I'll do like 15 ml per gallon, and I'll spray them with xylitol. The xylitol is basically to just keep everything clean. And if I'm going to spray them with something, I'm not going to spray them with water or fertilizer. I just spray them with a little xylitol, and then I'll dome them back up, and then you'll see they're going to stand up again and pray. So, yeah, if your clones are yellowing and they're under a dome, I think they're just trying to tell you, hey, we're ready to go. Give us some fresh air and some more food, and they're going to go.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part. I know that like doming protocols are something that a lot of people are they look for to try and find someone that has like the recipe, right? Where this is how you do it every single time and then your clones are going to take. And we've had some questions from people before we did this that people were asking, are certain clones are certain cultivars harder to clone? Like, do certain
Of
cuttings
course.
have different requirements? And the answer is yes. And also, it's hard to really tell exactly what those requirements are, depending on sort of how you go about cloning. If you're cloning a bunch of different things under one dome, like I know Gabby and I will both do, then you have to kind of follow the path of least resistance that works the best for all the clones involved. So when you're going from a high humidity to a low humidity, the main purpose of that is just to maintain a low transpiration rate in the clone so that it doesn't dry out before it has the ability to take in water. And the only way it can take in water before it has calloused or rooted is through absorbing water directly through the epidermis of the actual stalk of the plant. And so that happens a lot slower than it would through a root system or callus. And so when you're slowly removing that humidity, you're allowing the plant to realize it needs to uptake water faster, which can help push root formation, but you need the callus formed first in order to make sure that the roots actually push out if it's rooting from the cut end of the plant. But it can also root from the stem directly, just depending on the hormonal balances there. So that's kind of where this whole requirement for lowering the humidity over time comes from. But I've also recently found a lot more success in keeping humidity high for a lot longer, where you get a lot more robust root growth across a wider swath of the total amounts of clones that you've taken. And then I start to harden them off. But the whole thing is you have to be so much more sterile with that because you're keeping the humidity like upwards of 85 to 90% for 7 to 9 days, and then slowly starting to open it.
Well, you're reminding me of something else. I want to make sure that we tell people, particularly in a commercial environment, using domes is not only not necessary, but it's it's not recommended.
Yeah.
The best way is to have an environment for fresh cut clones, and then an environment where you can, acclimate them.
Yep.
Okay. And, if you ever went into a commercial nursery of any other plant, you ever, see greenhouse production of plugs and, started plants, you will never see a dome, and the idea of using a dome is just completely, like it's too much work,
Yeah.
and
Like,
not only is it too much work, but you have far less control. And I certainly didn't invent it because, like I said, it's been done in normal horticulture forever. But I was one of the first people that I knew that did it in cannabis, which is, we made a room, we had the humidity super high, and then we would just dial it down, okay, as the clones were rooting. And that's by far the best way to do it,
yeah.
and, the dome has a bunch of problems. Number one, I would want the humidity to start off at 80, 85%. Well, when you put them under a dome, you're very likely to be at 100%. Okay. And it's very hard to control it. You can open these vents, and also you don't have gauges under them. And if you have multiple
Right.
domes, you don't have gauges under every dome. So,
And then you're trying
dome,
to match your doming protocol with your irrigation protocol to make sure that you're not just getting a whole bunch of evaporative moisture off of the
well, you're
overly
going to.
saturating it. Yeah,
You're,
I mean you're going to, so you have to like dome you have to pull the domes and wipe them more frequently. At least in my experience, that's what I've found to be the only way to be at 100% success rate for the most part. But
That's
we
a
have
lot of
some.
work.
It is a lot of
You
work.
have a lot of domes. You're taking off those domes. And let me ask you, when you do it, are you using like a clean towel on every dome, or are you
So
spraying them with zero towel or something?
I use like a bleach rag that I wring out of 10% bleach solution until it's dry, but it's like a terry cloth, so it gets pretty darn dry, and then I can wipe out the dome, and then wring it and
Which
rinse it
again,
again just to keep it clean in each dome, and it's not really worth it. The next step up from like the small domes, right, is the Athena VP dome. I really like that one just because it has both plastic and fabric. You can use a full plastic one. You can get them from like Uline for super cheap, that are like all clear plastic that wrap a whole sort of wire metal shelf. Or you can
oh,
find other
you're
ones.
talking about the
Yeah,
making your
like
entire tent the dome.
yeah, so it's like a 4 foot by 18 foot footprint that's, four shelves worth of four clone trays per rack, and those work really well. But
Well, then you still
it's
have to be able
also
to move. You have to
you still
move
have, yeah,
air
you got to
into
move
the
them.
room, and like in a tent like that, how do you put a humidifier in it?
Right,
You know,
so I mean, you can only really use them if you have them at least 3/4 full, because then the transpiration rates of the clones are going to keep it humid enough for success. But anything less than that, sometimes you run into problems. Sometimes, especially if you're cutting clones and leaving barely any foliage on to make sure that you can fill a full tray, you're not going to have that much transpiration off of them initially. So, yeah, maybe you need to spray the clone down or add humidity to a room that it's surrounding, and depending on which one you're using, if it has fabric, right, you're going to get a bunch of evaporation through the fabric, so you're going to lose humidity over time, which is advantageous in certain situations because then you slowly have that drop in humidity that helps with rooting. But in other situations it could drop too rapidly, and then you have just plants struggling to root and stomatal closure, and you're just not going to get a happy plant from that, because then they won't even be able to uptake nutrients at the point of rooting.
one thing I want to make sure is that we're not discouraging people from doing their own clones because you know, we're talking about optimal, right?
Yeah.
And most of you guys, if you just go and put your clones in the plugs and dome them, maybe they're domed too long, and they yellow a little bit, but the stuff should still root. But you know, like for me, I take clones every day, right? And because I take clones every day, I can't have an environment for each of those, right? But let's say you only took clones once a week or less often than that, right? Now you could have one room that has 85% humidity, and then you could have another space where you could dial it down from there,
Yep.
okay? And or even the space that has 85% humidity, if they're all the same age, you know, okay, let me take a step back. Let's say you only take clones once every couple of months, right? And you could have a climate controlled space where you take the clones, you start them off at 85% humidity, and then day by day, you lower it. I'd probably lower it from 85 to 70 or 75, within 10 days, maybe 1% every day.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you did that, your clones would have the least amount of stress because they're not going from high humidity to low humidity. You're gently acclimating them. And that's really the best way to do it. So, and now that I think about it, whether it's a small or large garden, it doesn't matter. What matters is how frequent you're having to cut.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, for example, like if your goal is to just keep one genetic around for forever, then I like to try and keep like the cloning cycle as frequent as possible, just so that you also then aren't losing that practice if you have a small home grow and you're only cloning every once in a while, because you do start, like, you need to get into a rhythm of it. And the rhythm is really about sort of that, I feel like, the initial cutting protocol, like how are you cleaning your cuts, how are you like sticking your cuts, what hormones are you using, what's your substrate type, but then also your acclimation into whatever environment it's going to end up in. So going from like a clone environment to something that is more mimicking of the mother space or your veg space or wherever you're going to keep that plant eventually, just so that you get the healthiest possible outcome. But I think maybe we could talk a little bit about like the process start to finish.
Yeah, before we do that, one thing that I wanted to talk about was different ways you can clone, right? And one of the
Sure.
questions, it wasn't a question, but Genetic Monkey Farms, I was just glancing quickly and he says, I like the 36 site Clone King, simple setup, no domes, and always get more clones than I can use. And so I'm assuming he's talking about like an aeroponic cloner. And
Yeah.
I've used aeroponic cloners, like, from the very beginning. A shout out to my buddy Larry Brooks, who is the owner of General Hydroponics, and he made this system called the Ian Getty, and it was a little blue aeroponic cloner. Have you ever seen that thing, Nick?
I think so. I remember seeing like the early
The
bubbler cloners.
rainforests.
Well, I just remember seeing the early bubbler cloner where it had just I don't know, it was just like a tray with a lid, and
Well,
they
the
just had like little sights that you could, and then it had an air stone in the bottom of it.
yeah. Well, the Ian Getty was like a true aeroponic system, and it used kind of a motor from the old dehumidifiers that spun and throws the water. But not dehumidifiers, humidifiers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Those humidifiers that you'd spin, they spin and throw the water.
No,
Okay,
not
this is
humid.
old school. This
Oh, oh, I know what
like a
you're talking about.
Vicks,
Yeah,
like you used to put Vicks cinnamon, did spin and make a. Okay, well,
sure.
so the Ian Getty had like it was like a little blue thing, and it had four holes in it with neoprene discs in it, and you'd put your clones in there, and that was the first aeroponic cloner that I'd ever seen. I think it might have been the first one ever commercially available. And from there to the easy cloners and some other stuff. One thing about aeroponic cloning is because you're creating an environment, if you do it right, that is ideal for root production. They grow roots really fast. I don't use them, and there's a number of reasons why I won't consider using an aeroponic cloner. Um, the first one is it's too much labor. People think it's less labor, but it's actually more because, particularly if you have a lot of plants, when you're transplanting a bare root clone, you have to be so delicate. And it takes so much time to, like you fill a pot with soil, you make a little mound, you got to rest the roots on top, and then you have to gently, put it on and gently. Where if you got plugs, you're going boom, boom, super
Yep.
fast. Okay, so on a commercial level, to like consider doing aeroponic cloning is just it's
And
not feasible.
Louis Farmstrong in the chat brought up a really good point. You should really only be doing one strain, and not only one strain, but from one mother plant at a
So that
time
that
to
was the
make sure
next
that
thing I
you're
was
not
gonna say.
spreading disease. Because
Yeah,
even if it's not something like hops latent, let's say you have some sort of really
50 and
low,
fusarium.
yeah, but at a very low threshold, it'll still be there, and then it'll proliferate in that water like nobody's business, unless you have an extremely high oxidative reductive potential. So you just and then even then you're gonna potentially hurt the roots. So that's a huge one to
Cleanliness
consider
is
as
the
well.
next reason why I don't do it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
as in a commercial setting, like where, from my perspective, because I have a library that I have to maintain of over like 150 different plants, so I can't really keep cloners like that going constantly with the labor that I have at my disposal. Doing domes and substrate based allows each one to be handled separately with clean bleached scissors, bleached scalpel for making the incision when cloning it, and in general, it keeps it a little bit cleaner, but there is still a high potential for something to be there within that population. And so, if it's going to be there within that population, if I throw them all into the same water bath, that's probably the easiest way to spread it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to talk about how I water my clones later, but it's psychotic. because I take every effort possible for the roots to not share water. So um, yeah, that's that. I would never grow mother plants in a system, and I have some good friends that make these systems, so they're gonna hate me for saying it, but like a deep water culture, where you're sharing multiple buckets from other plants, can't do that. You
No,
know, for
not my
flowering,
preference.
yeah, for flowering, maybe you can do that because if your plants get contaminated at that point, you're
Yeah,
not as concerned,
but
But for
never
your
from
mother plants,
mothers.
your
Oh my god.
clones, aeroponics or deep water culture, for me, is just a really bad idea.
I even liked for mother plants to have some sort of more biologically active root zone because you can then help prevent some potential pathogens by just the out competing of the beneficials that you have within the root zone. So
I
that's
go
one
the
way to
other
also
route.
help. Yeah,
I
you
go
just
the
go
route.
sterile, sterile, sterile.
Yeah, I go sterile, sterile, sterile. I try to keep everything 100% sterile. Um, I don't want anything growing except for the plants. So, what is
I
that
see
product called? The chlorine product that I use? I forget what it's called. You know what I'm talking about?
hypochlorous acid.
Hypochlorous acid. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if you are using, like, let's say you are using an easy cloner or some sort of other aeroponic cloner, like I see here in the chat, Jonah Foley been running a 32 site cloners, a bunch of them it looks like, for 20 years. That's awesome. Like, if it's been working for you, then that's
Also,
amazing
if it's
because
not
when you
really
have,
new genetics, right? Let's say he's been growing the
yeah,
same plants for 20 years, and you know, I mean, I saw the comment before, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm targeting them.
no,
You know, like
no,
I love aeroponics. I think it's
yeah.
so amazing, but it's just for me risky business for
I
spreading your clones.
I agree. I do like it for certain things, like having an aeroponic cloner on hand is super nice when you don't have the time to hydrate substrate, or if you run out of substrate or something and you do have nutrients on hand, you can always run a hydroponic
Let's
cloner.
say it's a small one, and you're just gonna put one
Yeah,
strain in there, then that could be. And let's say it's a difficult strain to clone, that could be a really great option. For
yeah.
me, it's just at scale, it's a problem. A
It
commercial operation, when you have to grow any significant number of clones, it's just too much labor and too much risk
yeah.
for
And
disease and pests.
And here's like another reason why it really is situation dependent. Like in the chat, Jonah Foley says they go straight from the cloning machine into a current culture recirculating deep water culture system. So that's awesome because you're using water roots formed in a hydroponic environment going into a hydroponic environment, and they're going to do, relatively better than something that is going from a hydroponic situation in the cloning stage to a substrate based media.
But I want to ask Jonah a question. So Jonah, you go from aeroponics into um, directly into the current culture, which, by the way, I love Daniel, the owner of Current Culture. He's a great guy. He was one of the people I didn't want to piss off with that comment. But um, the current culture system has like a mesh pot, and in that mesh
Yeah, so
pot,
like Hydroton or something, right?
right. So you still have to be, I mean, with hydroton, you have to be even more delicate when you're
Fair.
transplanting,
But
because if you put the bare roots in there, it's like just by dropping the hydroton on it, you could be breaking and damaging some of those delicate roots. I understand that if you go from a cube to um, an aeroponic system like that there is some type of transitional stress, but I think it's far less than the stress we make just by touching. And
oh,
and my guess is that if you put a plant from a cube into that current culture system, the roots grow down into it right away, and you have zero stress. But when you try to transplant the bare root plant into anything, you know, bare root plants are designed, or were generally designed to be transplanted in their dormancy. And transplanting a bare root plant while it's growing, that's gonna be stressful. There's no way around it.
I mean, because at that point you're dealing with different levels of osmotic stress on the roots. So like if you're going from just a hydroponic situation into a substrate based situation, then you not only have the osmotic gradient of whatever like the pore water electrical conductivity is on that of the whatever you're saturating the substrate with, but you also have sort of the what you could call the matrix potential of the substrate pulling on the roots themselves as the substrate dries out. And so you have to consider both of those. Whereas in a hydroponic situation like a deep water culture, you only have the electrical conductivity and the osmotic gradient there between that and the roots to worry about. So you do have a lot less of what a lot of people would call transplant shock when you're going from like media to like media. The one this being like aeroponic cloning into a hydroponic media with enriched with oxygen versus like if you're going from hydroponics to media, that's kind of where I've had the most issue. But if you're going from media to hydroponics, I haven't really seen too many issues there because roots will adapt to a hydroponic environment really rapidly, especially if you're keeping that substrate really small, like a root right plug,
Yeah.
a grow down
Eventually,
plug.
there's so much roots in that system
Yeah.
that even if that root right cube was bone dry, it wouldn't matter
Yep.
because the roots are, down in the bottom, you know, going nuts. I don't
Yep.
think Jonah answered us um, about going into a media, right? Because that system, yet it's not. Like, so one thing that was cool about the Ian Getty and the rainforest from General Hydroponics is they had systems that were actually medialess, and the Ian Getty, it just had a neoprene disc. You stuck the clone in, okay, and you could grow plants in it. It wasn't just a cloner. You could,
Sure.
I mean, obviously, trying to grow cannabis in it would be difficult because they'd fall over. They don't have the support, or maybe you'd have to support it from above or something. But yeah,
Just
they
to answer a
needed.
couple of questions here, though, genetics memory farm, it that's what I think it is abiotic stress due to the osmotic gradient between the substrate as it dries back and the roots only being used to the osmotic gradient just in the water itself. So you have two different things acting on it, and it would be more of an abiotic stress because it is the actual physical drying of the substrate that would be causing it stress. So I think you're absolutely right that that's what's causing it. And I am also in agreement that more should be looked into. It could potentially be something that does end up causing a more desirable terpene profile, but you can do that a lot with dryback control in substrate already. So I don't know why you would want to do that early on if it's going to cause stress to the roots and slow or lower the rate at which it roots into the substrate. Because at that point, you're just losing time when you really want it to root in fully, because then you can control the substrate volumetric water content to increase that osmotic gradient so that you create that abiotic stress. And then also, I just wanted to say that it's like Jonah Foley, we just want to make sure that we're being clear. Hydroponic propagation and cultivation is a great style when you have it down. And if you've been doing it since 2007 and have kept something this method through this method since then, that's impressive, regardless of any growing style. And so, you
He
know,
should get on the way we grow so he could tell us how he grows
yeah,
more
tell us more about
supervised.
it. That'd be great. If you've been growing since then, you probably have some stories. So, shoot us a message, get on the show. That would be great.
Yeah. So hey, one thing I wanted to say real fast is this is the first time we've ever done a live, so please excuse our rookiness on this. But I did want to ask. Right now we
Sorry, my
have
dog.
11 likes on this video, and there's 90 of you watching. So I'm just curious if 80 of you are just still trying to figure it out, or you're just too lazy to press that thumbs up button. I'd appreciate it if you guys did because um, it'll help it so that more people can see it. And if you had a minute to go and share this link Right now we got 90.
Shameless shilling and plugging.
It's not like I'm trying to get them to go to
No, they're trying to sell.
GabyInside.com.
We're trying to sell us, man. We're cool.
I,
We're
I
cool
just
guys.
want
We
there
know
to be
what we're
more
talking
people joining
about.
the conversation, and so like if you guys could share this maybe on Instagram, which I don't think we did. I don't think I didn't share it just before I logged on. So a couple of you guys share it for me. I'd like to see that we get a couple of hundred people watching and contributing to this conversation. Also, after we talk about cloning, I have some other things that I want to talk about. Um, Mainly like, chill, Gabby. I'm picking up the kitten shit. Alrighty, you don't have to press the like button if you're picking up chicken shit. I'm worried about your screen now. But oh, he
Yeah,
said kitten shit, not chicken shit. Just to be clear.
yeah, we'll get to some updates and stuff at the end of the show,
Yeah, I want people
and
to stick
Gabby,
around because I have some shit that I want to say later.
yeah, we have some updates about the sours and stuff, so I'm sure people will be interested in that. But yeah, we'll do that at the end. But so I think that we did get a good sort of comparison of like where we stand at least on substrate versus hydroponic based cloning.
I
And
know with substrate, there's so many different kinds too, right?
right. And so with substrate there are a bunch of different kinds. So to try and stick on topic just a little bit, I know that lately you and I have both been using the same substrate for cloning, the Charquar cocoa coins. Yep. So again, we're not sponsored by anybody,
But they
but
should send us some.
I'm down to get free shit. So but those are, they work so well because especially there's so many people using media that has cocoa coir in it. So whether it's just pure cocoa coir or like a cocoa coir perlite mix or even just like an amended soilless media, something that's like a living soil or something, there's a lot of them that have cocoa coir in it. So being able to use a substrate that mimics the same water holding capacity as well as the way in which water moves across the substrate from the rooting, like the rooting substrate, what you clone in into the actual transplant substrate helps a lot with transplant shock. So I've found that these just work great. I use cocoa coir, but I've also seen a lot of people using like a soilless organic media have a lot of success with them, and they also root in great to sorry, blanking, rock wool. So like they work great in rock wool, but I'm sure some of the people here have experienced using rock wool and then transplanting that into cocoa coir or something. And if the plant isn't extremely well rooted, then you can sometimes have this sort of osmotic stress on the plant where it pulls all the water out of that rock wool into the cocoa coir or whatever other media that it is, and you actually have to keep it like more hydrated with more frequent irrigations to fully allow it to root in properly. So because rock will then can tend to have that issue if you're going from one direction to the other, but if you're using cocoa coir and you don't have that issue going backwards, or not backwards, but into rock wool, then it just seems like that's the media to go with, especially when you're in Gabby's position and you're shipping clones to people, and they have all sorts of different medias that they're going to end up using with those clones. So that's kind of my 2 cents on why cocoa coir for the substrate for for cloning, but I think that there's a lot of different options and they all work really
I think
well.
what I would say is if you're growing in Rockwool, I recommend you start in Rockwool. If you're not growing in Rockwool, then I would recommend you grow in these plugs.
Yeah.
Whether you're growing in cocoa or some other soilless media or some organically amended media, this is what I would suggest because it's still closer to, those types of media than is Rockwool. But if you're growing in Rockwool, you know, there's a reason for it, and I would just recommend that at that point you propagate them in Rockwool as well. I like these. I like these better than Rockwool, but not enough to go from these to Rockwool if I was continuing on in cubes.
Yeah, you would just you'd keep
and
cloning
start.
in these. Oh, you'd
Well,
start it with rock wool.
if
Yeah,
I was going to grow in
fair.
like a 6 inch rock wool cube or something like that, I would start them in rock wool and then move them to that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, in the end, that's kind of along the same lines of if you're gonna be growing in deep water culture and you're using an aeroponic cloner, it makes a lot of sense because your cloning media is the same as your flowering media. And so if you think along that same lines with rock wool or cocoa coir, or even if you're growing in like a peat based media, then you might want to use like a peat based plug, like something like root riots or something, so that you do have sort of that same water retention and water movement gradient represented in both rooting media and the rest of your growing media. So I think that's kind of the standard that I use. If I have to choose anything for rooting media, then I'm gonna go with whatever it is that I'm flowering out in. But I also transplant directly into my final flowering pot from clone. I don't do a step up or an up potting stage, but I also finish flowering in a 1 gallon pot, so it works really well.
Um, should we should we get more into the demonstration and actual specifics of
Yeah,
how
why
I
don't we
do
do the
it, or
we can do the demonstration and then I
are you
can
able to
help
make me full
answer.
screen? I'm just wondering because if not, I got to be a little bit more careful about
Yeah,
how
I can
I.
go like this. Can you I think that
Right now,
oh
I'm seeing half and half on the YouTube, like we just share the screen half and half. But when I'm looking on Riverside, I'm just like in a small corner of the screen.
okay, let's see. Well, now it looks like you are full screen on YouTube.
No, there we go. All right, cool. Oh, so it's whoever's talking is full screen because now it bounced back to you.
And we'll do this one though.
Okay, why don't you answer some questions and I'm gonna get my camera all set up.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute
So
myself so you guys don't hear me moving stuff.
I'm gonna go back through some of these questions then. So I also have some questions I can go through here that I took down from Instagram. So let's see. Going back up. Sorry, I didn't get to these earlier, but Genetics Memory Farm brought up a great point about what you could use for keeping a hydroponic cloner clean, and he was talking about using pool shock that breaks down into elemental calcium, and he does it at 1 tablespoon of diluted solution every third day. So that sounds like it's a great thing. I'm pretty sure that breaks into hypochlorite, calcium hypochlorite. I think.
I had to stop what I was doing to let you know I use dichlor, which is pool shock, for sanitizing everything.
Yep.
The only thing that I use regular household bleach for is my scissor dunks. And the reason
Yep.
why is for my scissor dunks, I want to make sure that it's not too strong
Yep.
because that bleach is going to touch the cut end. But like when I'm sanitizing my trays and my pots, I just use the powdered dichlor. And I know I'm using too much
Yep.
because that water is, you can
For
smell the
sure.
chlorine. Try to
And I know.
read too much of it, but that's how I. Because if I had to use actual liquid bleach to sanitize my shit, it would be insane. Like how
For
much
sure.
bleach I would have to buy.
For
So
sure. Well, so like yeah, with what you were saying with the bleach, with the like soaking for instruments, you want to go between 10 and 20% bleach, and that's if it's a 3% sodium hypochlorite bleach that you would buy at just like your normal store. And there's a few tests that have shown that 10 to 20% efficacy is exactly what you need. And then, but back to what we were talking about before in terms of things that you can use to keep a hydroponic cloning media clean, or even a like even to add into your soaking solution for your clone cubes, just to make sure that you have the most sterile media possible to help induce sort of a clean callus at the cutting end, you can use things like xerotol, which is peroxacetic acid, and hydrogen peroxide. You can use hydrogen peroxide as long as it's food grade. You can use hypochlorous acid, so HOCl. You can get that in forms of a bunch of different companies sell that as like their cleanse, like Athena cleanse is hypochlorous acid. You can also use chlorine dioxide dissolved in water. So there's some new products out there now that are similar to like if you've seen the product Guard N Clean, like GUARD N Clean. It's just like a chlorine dioxide sachet that is a slow release or a quick release into the environment to keep your environment free of bacteria and
That's
pathogens. But
another product that we don't get paid to support, but
nope, I'm
man,
just giving out
that's great.
options because
That's a great
there's a
product.
lot now. But they
Yeah.
have one now that you can take the sachet and soak it in like distilled water or deionized water and allow it to soak for a certain amount of time, and it makes like a 500 or more part per million solution of chlorine dioxide that you can then dilute down for different applications, and you can use it for like line cleaning and for sterilization of your tools and your media. So those are all great options that you can use, especially if you're trying to keep it clean or keep it cheap as well. Then some might be better than others. And then if you are using something like hypochlorous acid, you could look into something like a hypochlorous acid generator that just requires sodium chloride, so like table salt, or potassium chloride, which is like a salt substitute. And both of those, when gone through this ionization process, will form hypochlorous acid. And then if you use sodium chloride, then you'll have leftover sodium in solution. And if you use potassium chloride, you'll have leftover potassium in solution. So I go potassium chloride because then you have the added bonus of a little bit more potassium in your solution, and you're not putting in the sodium, which could be detrimental to your plants if you have too much in there, especially if you're using something like cocoa coir that already has sodium potentially at some of its cation exchange sites if it hasn't been fully buffered. So just things to consider and remember. But it looks like Gabby's about ready to start doing some cloning here, so I'm gonna turn it
Yeah.
over to him.
Can you make me full screen so I can see what the screen sees?
Yep. Let me see here. Go ahead.
Mike says, I disagree with Gabby. Cling King, easy, no dome. I don't know what he's talking about. So, because
Oh, don't worry about it.
I agree best is with no dome. And then thanks, Jonah Foley, for the love. I'm seeing you full screen, but I'm not seeing me. There we go. Alrighty. So first thing I want to do is talk about some of the supplies that we have. Somebody mentioned before what I use is Dip and Grow. It's just highly concentrated. I don't like using gels. I find that Dip and Grow for me has been a reliable tool. When you buy the Dip and Grow, they have a little on this. It says like concentrate fill line. It's on the bottom. Okay, it's just the very bottom, and so shake it up first. And that's kind of what you're looking for. And then I believe it's times 10, but you just fill it up halfway. And that is the rooting hormone that I use. Always use gloves when I handle this stuff because it's not the friendliest of products. Something else that I prepared yesterday to bring in. This is micronized sulfur, 1 tablespoon per gallon. I use this product religiously in my clone rooms. Then in this cup, I have 20% bleach and water. 80% water. And then my scissors. People are gonna look at these scissors and be like, what type of scissors does Gabby use? Like, why would he use that? And I'm gonna explain shortly. But so these are the tools. Then we already talked about the cocoa plugs, and I'll do another unpaid advertisement. The cocoa coin. I actually hate this company. Um, I shouldn't say I hate the company, but they shut down my grow stores. The competition was just insane. They were like this big corporation, and so. But yeah, that's a good product that they got. And but I guess I just blew any chance of them sponsoring my thing. Anyway, then I like using these Grodan trays. And what they do is try and see if I can find the right angle. They keep the clones from sitting in the bottom of the tray. Okay, they elevate it. They'll air prune it, if anything. And then I use trays that have holes in them. I drilled these holes in myself, but and then these trays go into a much bigger tray that'll house like four of them. It's like a 2x4 tray that will fit on one of those racks that we're talking about, like the baker's racks. What are those things called, Wolfie?
Those are called the just like wire
Yeah,
metal racks. Some people call them metro racks.
Metro racks.
Um, but yeah, those are what they are. And one thing that I want to bring up here, because it is one of the questions that we were asked earlier, and maybe you have an answer for it for your own situation, and then I can provide an answer for it. Is but the question is, how do you make sure that you don't have any sort of cross contamination when you are using a single, or when you're using your dipping solution, your rooting hormone? What are any, if any, precautions that you take to make sure that you don't have cross contamination when using it?
You know, to be honest with you, it's something that I've thought about and have not, that could be my weak point because I can't see throwing this away for every variety that I do.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like I said, I've thought about it. I'm hoping that this stuff is so powerful because you can't even put this stuff near your nose. You put this near your nose and it'll like burn the hairs off your nose. That I'm hoping that stuff can't grow in it,
For sure.
because it's,
Well, one of the main
but
issues, one of the main issues that that does arise, or that arises from that, is that there is alcohol in it, and viroids are proliferated in alcohol. So I personally understand where you're coming from, because it is like a waste, right? Especially when you're
not
given
just a
such a
waste, but
small.
it's a chemical. Like I don't, I'd be
Right.
dumping out,
You don't
a
want to waste
liter
the
of this
chemicals,
thing.
or yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I completely get that. And so, like, my solutions, if you're using a liquid rooting hormone, something like Dip and Grow, or Hormex diluted in water, or there's a whole bunch of different ones that you can use, where it's a powder that you dissolve in water and you dip your plants in, or it's a liquid that you dilute. So those, what I like to do is make up a large batch like what you have there, and then I'll use something like a shot glass, or a small some sort of small dish of some kind, and just pour a little bit into it, and I'll change it out every time that I have a cultivar, and give the dish a wipe out with a bleach rag. So that's one solution that I've found. One Another thing that I found is I really only
But that
like
that
to.
still ends up that still ends up you're throwing more of the stuff
Oh,
away, or
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. I mean, you end up you should only really pour in what you need for that amount, and with a liquid, you only need a small amount, if especially if you have a small vessel that you're putting it in. But you really only want to dip the very tip of your stem into the rooting hormone, because you want to promote the hormonal what those hormones that are in there. You want to have that only on the cut part of the plant to promote the callus formation as well as the rooting from that part. The hormones are also going to travel up the stem of the plant. And if you have hormones too high up on the stem, then that's when you start to get those aerial roots. If your humidity is too high for too long in the dome, where the roots are just popping out the side of the stem above the rooting media. And that can have some issues where you might get like a stem rot or something down below if the roots form above before they form down into the media. But that's sort of like a niche case that might not be happening to everybody. But for the
Well,
liquids, I like
we're
to
learning
have a
from
separate vessel.
we're
But
learning
that's
from
me.
each other,
Yep.
you know, and I appreciate it, and I hope that I can read through this chat and learn from the people there as well. But while generally I will have a bouquet of cuts that are ready, 20, 30 stems, and they fit
Oh, yeah.
perfectly into there. Okay. It's just like I couldn't really use a smaller vessel. I also like the fact, I'm hoping everyone's seeing this. I also like the fact that the vessel has got half of the space available to it, because when I put the cuts in, I give it a swirl. So if it's already too full, then it's going to be spilling everywhere.
Sure.
So, I mean, it could be that I'm old and stuck to my ways and stuff, but like the only way I would do it like that would be if I just was throwing it away. Now,
Yeah.
another solution to this contamination problem, which I haven't tried this, but back in the day before there were these products, there was Rutone,
The powder.
the powder, and
Yeah.
you could just sprinkle the powder on the cuts,
Yep.
and that way you wouldn't have to, or even then, it would be way easier to just put it on the bottom of the cuts. Now, one thing I'll say in response to what you said is I dip the cuts in the dip and grow, okay? But I try to make it so that I'm not dipping it higher than what's going to be buried in the media.
Right.
I don't try to just get the bottom. But like I said, I'm learning here. I could try to just like take this and quarter it, that way if I'm doing 4 strains, I'll use that much. And when I spin it around, I should be making contact with the bottom of those stems, which is the part that's really most important that the hormone touches.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
another thing that someone brought up in the chat that's a really great idea is, using something like an eyedropper or something like that to put a few drops in the top of each of um, the clone uh the clone coins. You could do that, or you could drip it directly
but
onto
that's a
the
lot.
cuttings.
That's a
Sure.
lot in there. Like
Sure. But that's like the other, like the other method with like the other style of rooting hormone, if it comes in a gel, is to put it into some sort of squeeze bottle and then just put a little dollop on the top of each one of the cocoa
well,
coins
that's
or
another
whatever
reason.
media that you're
Yeah,
using.
that ends up being a lot of that stuff too. Like
It's a lot of work
that's,
too.
I think it's
You're
excessive.
basically double touching everything.
No, I don't think it's really much more work because I just, I don't like how much of that you'd be using. I think that you put that, it's excessive.
Yeah.
And
The gel
that's just
already
part of the
uses a
reason why,
lot.
that's part of the reason why I like the liquid is
Yep.
because when you pull the stem out, it fully drips off. You don't have like a clump of that sitting on the bottom of your clone that then you
Yeah.
have to wipe it off. And the gel, it seemed like a good idea at first, but like now I can't imagine using gel. And so
Yeah.
I guess we won't be sponsored by Clonex or or
No.
those guys anytime soon.
The
But
gels also, they just, I don't ever really like, I've never really liked the gels. They just seem to, you use too much of it too fast. One of the questions that we had was, what's the shelf life on an open bottle of Clonex? And I've always kept it in the fridge because it gets weird when you leave it out at room temp. And so, like not necessarily like it getting like a skin or something because you can leave it closed, but it has like a different smell to it after it sits for a while. And anybody that's mixed up like even just fresh like dip and grow, or if you have just a
yeah,
plain
it's
indole
totally
3
different.
butyric acid, it has a very distinct smell to it when you mix it up fresh. So that's where I've had a little bit of concern about the shelf life of things as well, and I don't really know. I don't really know. I've used something until it was gone and just left it out out at room temp, and I never noticed a significant decrease in success rates in my cloning. But it is something to consider. But
One thing
yeah,
I
I
want
think that
to ask
that's
you about later, I don't want to talk about it, get too deep into it now, but I want to remember somebody mentioned it was aloe products.
yeah, I
It's
see those.
something, and
Yep,
I've never used it, but I've heard from a number of people that they swear by it, and so I wanted to
yep.
know if you knew anything about it. But
I've used aloe before, and I've used like the 100% aloe vera gel, and it works, but it works at the same rate that I feel like something with just no hormone would work. But what I did find success with is using aloe vera gel and then a little bit of the dip and grow or like a another hormonal solution
right,
and just mix a little bit of that into the gel so it is a gel. But that was when it was like the gel craze was like Athena just came out with their rooting gel, and there's a couple more rooting gels that came out, and everyone had a rooting gel, and I'm like, I'll make my own rooting gel. But it at this point I still don't really like gels because it just seems like you have too much extra
yeah.
there, and
But no,
whatever
the
that
aloe
gel
products
is
that I
is
was
it's
talking about, I think, was a powder.
I
Is
well,
this
so like the aloe vera powder you would still hydrate and then it would form a gel because it's basically like a dried gelling agent,
I
like a
didn't
like
know
a
that.
agar powder or something.
Alrighty, let
All
me
right,
do.
I'm gonna put the video back up so that everyone can see you.
Actually, I think the way it was half and half, I think I could still be seen. I'm not sure, but it's up to you. You're the
Let's go like this, and then you just talk the most, and then it'll stay on you.
alrighty. Well, so these are the scissors that I use, and people, are going to look at this and be like, "Well, why would you use scissors like that?" People generally want to use fiskars or razor blades. These are very sharp scissors, by the way. They're just long, and um, the reason why I use scissors like this is we're not trimming flower where we have to get in there and do precision cuts where you need a sharp tip. What you want is to have sharpness on the blades here in between, and these can be loosened and tightened, with the screwdriver if necessary. But the reason why I like these, I'll show you in a second as I take my first clone. So first of all, I'd like to say that I'm excited. This is the Chem 91, and this is not the VA cut. We won't call it the VA cut, but we'll say this was the clone that he held. So now I'm holding it. And so the way I um, prune this plant, I'm like looking at my computer and cutting here, is take that one off, take that one off, and then I go like this, and I trim all the tops. And this cut's a little bit too long. I like them like that. And then my scissor goes back into my bleach water. I'm gonna have 3 or 4 scissors in there. And that's what my cuts look like before I stick them in. I didn't cut the node off over here. I think you can see that, but I did cut the leaf. And I'll do a couple more.
Did you wash it? Did I miss that?
The clone,
Yeah.
I wash them afterwards.
Okay.
Um, like I said, I'm learning here. Do you think I should be doing the sulfur wash before I do these cuts?
I like to do the wash prior to doing the final cuts, but I also like to clean up my cuts before I wash them. So I'll usually cut them directly off the mother plant. I'll take off the extra fan leaves that I don't need. I'll take off the extra nodes that I don't need, and I'll bring them up to the top and trim them down to around the size of one of the cell spaces in a clone tray, just so that I don't have overlapping foliage. And then what I'll do is I'll go and I'll wash all those, because when I'm cutting them, I like to cut multiple at a time, and I use a cutting board that has two lines drawn on it in Sharpie. So I line up the top node at one end and I cut at the other Sharpie line, just so that the canopy is nice and even
Right.
in the clone tray.
I just estimate, you know, after you do them for a while, you can pretty much get a good estimate. The other thing is that, a lot of people talk about cutting at the node. And I
I don't
generally,
care.
yeah, I would love to cut at a node if if I can get it to be at the right height, then I might go, half a centimeter more in one direction or another so that I can do that. But I won't have a really long stem in order to cut at a node, you
Yeah.
know? So, this one, because I can, I'll cut it right above the node, take this one off here, and I left that little node to grow back.
That's the way.
And then I go like this and I cut them off. Now, cutting off these leaves, it's going to make it so that foliage doesn't overlap in the tray. That's the main purpose of doing that. And, these, if you're just doing a couple of clones using, small little fiskers, that's fine, But if you're trying to do a significant amount of clones, you have to speed up the process, however you can. So using long scissors like this, it's it's definitely the key.
I'd say the biggest thing is just to have sharp scissors.
Sharp, yeah.
So sharp matters the most in my opinion. I do like the idea of having long scissors if you're doing a lot of work. And then for myself personally, when I'm making a final incision, I like to use something like a razor blade just to make sure that the cut is really clean all the way through. I'm not really crushing any of the cell structure around the cutting. And from there, it goes directly into a hormonal dips to make sure that it like you're not getting any sort of aneurysms to form at the cut end, but also so that you're immediately applying that hormone, that concentrated hormone to that root space or where the roots are going to form, and then from there your plant's kind of got the best start that it can have. But yeah, I think that that's
Yeah.
one of the things that
So,
going for the actual node when cutting is ideal, but it's not necessary, and in a lot of cases, it's not practical.
yeah, well, in a lot of cases, it's detrimental because you want to have your clones be the same size in the tray.
Yep,
So if
that's
you're trying to
really
cut the
important.
node, and then they're not going to be the same size, and to me that causes way more problems. Um, One thing I'll say is, I mean, you guys should definitely check out the Way We Grow podcast because there's a lot that can be learned there, and I learn from this guy every day. There's just a question of how far am I going to take any one thing? How anal are you going to be about it? Or how simple are we going to do it? How important are certain things? Like when you talk about going from the cut directly into the rooting hormone, I don't do that. What I do, and what I like to do is let me just finish because I'm almost done, and then you can tell me what you do differs and how you think I can do better because I would love that. But so now, generally, this wouldn't just be 3 or 4 cuttings, but this would be anywhere between 20 and 30 cuttings is generally the maximum. And I'll take them from one hand to another and I'll line up the stems. So the stems are all the same height. And you'll see without my ruler on the cutting board, they're all pretty damn close. They're close enough. And this is sulfur water that I made yesterday at work, but it's just 1 tablespoon of the micronized sulfur. And this is the way I do it. And Nick and I
Is
talked. And
is that 1 tablespoon in that quart, or did you make up one
no,
tablespoon in a gallon and then take a quart of it?
I did that. I took 1 tablespoon in a gallon and I put a quart in it. Okay. And so what I do is, first thing is I dip the stem in the sulfur water. then I turn it upside down and I give it all a swirl in there. And then normally I'll shake this off onto the ground, but I'm in my kitchen, so try not to get sulfur everywhere. And then that's it. Okay. Then when I'm done with that, that's when I go straight into the dip and grow. I don't make a second cut. You were talking about making a second cut with, razor blades. If you have to make a second cut, it's because your scissors weren't sharp enough. And you should be able to tell when you're going through those stems cleanly or when they're pinching them a little bit. And if you're getting good success rate, you don't have to fuck with it.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, maybe it was one of the steps that we might have missed, but just to touch on it briefly, like, so when I'm taking cuttings, I take all the cuttings at once. I trim up all the extra leaves. I take the cutting off the top and I put them in the holding cup, like what you have on the side
Right.
there. And I leave them there for 12 to 18 hours to help harden them off to create a more hardy clone when it's going into then this extremely high humidity environment. So from there, I will take all those cuts out of the water
You
and
keep it
I'll
in the
cut.
refrigerator?
No, I just keep it at in the clone room at the humidity and temperature that the rest of the clones experience. And so what I'll do then is I'll line them up on the cutting board, make the incision, the final cutting, dip them in to whatever hormone I'm using and go right into the substrate like you're about to do. But what that does for me is I can help increase the rate at which they'll harden off later down the line. It seems to work best for me, and I can work with a larger batch of clones at once. So if I'm cutting 1,000 clones in a day, I can do all the cutting in one day and then do all of the plugging the next day.
Yeah.
And that seems to help a lot. If I am doing it for just a really small case, then ideally I'll cut them at the beginning of the day and I'll stick them by the end of the day, but I'll still let them harden off in that cup for a little bit. And that also allows for them to dry off fully from when I was washing them,
Yeah.
and for the turgor to just be at its absolute maximum when I'm making that final incision. So
Let me
that I
finish this,
found,
and then you can
yeah,
tell me
finish up what you're doing.
because normally I would have gone from the sulfur directly into the dip and grow.
Sure.
Okay. And normally because it's a big bunch, but that's about how far it's gonna go. And I give it a good spin generally because there's a whole bunch of plants. Not I never just put 4 in there, right? And then I take nice sturdy clones. Okay, like I want them to have a little bit of a woody stem. And I think if they weren't so woody, they'd root faster, but you got to be more delicate, right? So I take these woody stems and I can just push the clone into the media and I can tell that they're not getting hurt. Okay. And I don't start from like way up high here and push because look, I got an extra clone, so I'll show you. You don't want to do this, right? So what I'll do is I start pushing from really low and I generally gently push it down till there's no more room. Now you can see here the way I skipped a hole. Well, here I planted here, here, and here. And I just
Yeah,
keep skipping.
checkerboard.
I checkerboard pattern them. So I think I get 38, no, excuse me, 39 in this flat. But you can see that they're not laying on each other. Okay. And the other thing about it is because, I sell clones, I want them to last in the tray. They might need to grow a little bit without overcrowding everybody. So that's the way I do that. And then I already showed you guys the domes. But like I said, the sides, I'll have like halfway on both sides. And the top starts off closed. And, when I do this whole tray, the way it's going to evaporate, it's going to make the dome, super
Nice and
humid.
humid. Yep.
Yeah, too
So,
humid, to be honest. Now, one thing I forgot to talk about is how I prepare the cocoa cubes. Um,
oh yeah, you mind if I
I,
touch on that?
sure.
Cool. Because I know that this is so. Full disclosure.
By the way, this is
These
the way we grow, right?
yeah, at times,
We're
you
talking
know.
about the way we grow. I'm not telling any stories or anything.
No, but the charcoal and cocoa coins have been something that I've been using for a really long time, and so I really like their product, and I will probably use it until something better comes along. But I've done a little bit of trialing for them as well, just through the commercial facility that I work and I help manage, and we found that soaking the cocoa coins, you really want to do it for a minimum of 2 hours, with the sweet spot being around 4 hours. And the reason being is that cocoa coir, when it's dry, is a little bit hydrophobic, and so it really takes some time for it to fully to, to to fully absorb all of the water it requires to reach full field capacity. And the reason why you want to do that is because the increased surface area of the fully absorbed cocoa coir is going to have greater contact with the cutting, so you're going to have less potential for the plant to lose turgor or wilt or die off from not having enough water in its root zone. But it also has a high enough air to water ratio where it's going to callus over quickly and root really rapidly. So when you're doing that, you really want to soak them for at least 2 hours, 4 hours being ideal. And then I know that for me personally, and Gabby, I want to hear what you do here, but I use 1.3 EC veg solution for the soak at 5.6 to 5.7 pH.
And oh, so that's actually higher than what I do. I do like an EC of 1.0.
Okay.
So for those of you that use ppm, it's like 500 parts per million. And then the pH is generally about 5.8, 5.9.
Yeah.
So, and
It's within the same parameters.
yeah, and what I've been using is um, Canna's product, Cannastart.
Yeah,
That's I used to use the Clonex solution, but I find the Cannastart is a much better product, so that's what I've switched to.
for sure. Yeah, because we'll use the 1.3 EC until they root, and then we'll go straight to full strength. Or I've stepped it up and gone different directions, but usually they root within like 2 weeks, and by that time I've already prepped the pots for them to transplant into, so they'll be hit with like around a 4.0 veg solution at that point, but in a high intensity environment. So that I think the EC, it has to be somewhere. You can't just go plain water if you really want healthy, robust clones coming out of the cloning environment. But like 1.0 works really well, 1.3 works well. I've seen some people just go straight to 2.0 or 2.5 for their cloning and have no issues whatsoever, as long as their mother plants have a high enough feed to keep their phloem and xylem at a high enough EC where you have that proper osmotic gradient between the substrate pore water EC and the phloem and xylem within the cut clone. But that's something I'm working on. I'm going a little bit off on a tangent there because I am
Well,
working on some
something.
research there right now that is really fascinating stuff. But I'll hopefully be able to tell more about that in the future once I finished it. I don't really have it locked down yet.
So I feed my clones a very high EC once they're rooting. Okay, I feed them 2.0 when like so when I give the clones their initial watering, they're at 1.0, and I won't water them until those domes come off. Okay, when those domes come
For
off,
sure.
okay,
Yeah,
when the domes come off,
well,
people may be
let's talk
shocked by
about
this.
doming.
Yeah,
Before we get to the first irrigation, because I feel like that's the
I
first
brushed by it too
irrigation is
fast.
extremely dependent upon your doming procedures. Some people will slowly vent the domes before ever pulling them off and wiping them out. Some people will pull them off, but just kind of tap them to get some of the water out, but not fully dry. Some people, like myself, I dry them once a day, every day until they're rooted, and then I start to pull them off. So what do you go with for yours though? Because I feel
I,
like that's
I,
important to get to
I'm
that first irrigation.
so I'm a one man show, and I'm not as young as you are, but I, I just tap the domes when they have too much moisture on them. Okay, and then once every couple of days, everything's getting sprayed with Xeritol.
Oh, so you are spraying the actual like foliage of the plants
Yeah,
in the dome.
and I
So
switch back and forth between Xeritol and sulfur.
then your first irrigation is like what at day 7 or 8?
Yeah, it could be 7 to 10 depending on when that dome
Wow.
comes off. And one thing that we mentioned before is you know I'm in a position where I can't take a flat of one strain often.
No.
Okay, maybe if it's the the sour or something like that, but generally I'm going to take like 15 clones of each. Okay, and the reason why is because I'm probably not going to sell that. So like to take a flat of each kind,
It's a
you know
waste.
so I'm in this unfortunate situation that to utilize my space properly, I mix in a flat. And if you can possibly avoid that, you should.
Yeah.
And I mean, the first reason why, just get out of the way is hygiene, right? Like spreading disease is much easier if you have multiple varieties in one flat. Um, but also, they want the domes to come off at different times.
Yep.
And so what happens is because, one plant can root, let's say in 5, 6 days, it's just like booming. And then another one, it might need 2 weeks or maybe even more, depending on what it is. Right. So when you are cloning multiple strains in the same dome, and I think you said this before, now you're like having to just not optimize, you
Yeah.
know, the 2 out of the 3 are making some sacrifices for the third,
Well, so
you
I
know?
want to just, clarify a couple things that we went over there then, as well as get to a question here that someone had in the chat. But so the reason why then you're able to not irrigate until somewhere between day 7 and 10, where I'm irrigating usually at day 5, and it's like a hard set for me in the commercial space where I'm like, we irrigated day 5. I don't want it to go past that, and that's just due to the fact that since I'm drying out the domes religiously every day,
Mhm.
I'm causing a lot more transpiration
That
through
moisture
the clones,
disappears.
and it's that moisture is disappearing. So if you're only tapping it out and just removing the majority of the moisture, but still leaving space within that environment for more transpiration as well as condensation to occur, then you can definitely stretch that first rooting out, especially when you're foliar spraying them as well. That's just providing all that additional moisture to the environment. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that that's really important. And I know that with some techniques, getting to that first dry back as soon as possible, especially when you're trying to promote something like callus growth, is extremely important. And kind of targeting a very specific window for when you have your first dry back allows you to know that certain things are sort of happening within the clone and at that cut point. But I really like that you can go a lot longer with it because then you do have the option for plants that need more humidity longer to root healthily when some of the plants that might already be rooted, especially since you're using pathogen suppression sprays, like you're really preventing any issues from those ones that are already rooted, already ready to get more air, and a different environment than that high humidity environment. So I think that those are good points to point out. Something that someone brought up here that when soaking your substrate, they brought up using like from Kroger's distilled water that comes out at a 5.8 to 5.9 pH. So when using anything like distilled water, or deionized water or reverse osmosis water, remember that there's not a high buffering capacity in that water. So the pH is going to swing a lot more readily, especially at a lower EC. So you might want to think about adding some sort of buffering solution to that water, something like potassium silicate or like calcium carbonate or something that is going to provide a high cation capacity within it already to sort of alkalize it against a lot of the acidity that nutrients will impart, because most nutrient solutions are going to trend towards acidic rather than basic. So I say it's great. It works really well. You know that there's nothing in it that you don't want, like heavy metals or something, but consider adding something to it to allow for a higher buffering capacity. So that should help if you're using
One
something
thing I'll
like
say
that.
is,
But that's just my experience with that. Go ahead, Gabby.
if you have good tap water, it can be way better than reverse osmosis or, you know, any other type of filtered water like they're talking about. Having some minerals in your water is not a bad thing. As a matter of
No.
fact, most nutrients were designed for water that has some amount of calcium in it. And
Yeah.
one of the main reasons why we're having to supplement, with calcium in our fertilizers is because most of us are using reverse osmosis water.
Yeah,
Um,
everybody should check out like pretty much everything that Genetics Memory Farm is saying in the chat. Is he has some really keen insights on this. Like he said, just cut it with some spring water, which is exactly what Gabby's talking about, right? Spring water coming up through the ground, it's going to pull minerals up with it. You're going to see a lot of things like calcium or magnesium in that spring water that's going to help buffer out that water so that you don't have a very acidic solution or a extreme swing in pH based on fluctuating conditions within that sort of pore water. So that's really important stuff there.
One thing that
But
he also said was, I never feed anything while they're in the cloner. Water and diluted HTH solution only. What's HTH solution? Um, Never felt like I needed it. So one thing I want to respond to in that statement is, you do not need any nutrient to root a plant.
no,
Okay, they will root in pure water. But the second that that first little root tip comes out, it wants food. So I always put food, whether it be in my cloner or in my media. That way, the minute that that first root tip comes out, it has food to grow. You
yeah,
know, and if you were to leave your plants in that cloner in pure water, they instantly go into decline once the roots start coming out. Um, Instantly,
yeah,
because they're just feeding on themselves. So it can be a very mild nutrient solution. It doesn't need to be an EC of 1.0. You know,
no,
I would say, at least zero point 0.5.
sure,
Something like that, and you'll um, the plant will grow and thrive instead of start to consume itself.
yep. I agree. And you can also control, and I know that I'm using the term osmotic gradient a lot, but it is really important when you're considering
Explain
sort
what it
of.
is then.
So, like the osmotic gradient would be the osmotic potential of one liquid and another liquid, and then sort of a semi permeable membrane between them, and the relationship between the two. So, if you have something that has more salts or more I'm forgetting the term, but it's basically whatever's dissolved in that water. So if you have more of something dissolved in that and a higher EC, let's say, and then something with less EC. So let's say you have a 2.0 solution and a 1.0 solution across the semi-permeable membrane, then the water from the lower EC solution is going to travel across that semi-permeable membrane to dilute the higher EC solution until they reach an equilibrium. And so if you have a and this is where some of this research I've been doing comes in. So like the sap test analysis of cannabis plants shows that your phloem and xylem are typically somewhere above 6.0 EC. And so if you are sticking a plant into something that has if you're sticking that high EC cutting, let's call it, right, into something with a lower EC, then you're going to be pulling water from that low EC into the plant. That's just how that osmotic gradient is going to act. you can increase the EC of that substrate to slow down the rate at which that water is pulled across that semi-permeable membrane. But that's kind of where I'm doing more testing right now, because if you can decrease that rate at which it goes across, then you decrease the rate at which you need to irrigate that substrate. But if you want to achieve a fast dryback, then by lowering that EC, you're going to pull more water across to sort of create that equilibrium across the two substrates. Now, this is where it's like you can see where I'm kind of going with this. Hopefully, where by manipulating that, you can increase or decrease the dryback, but you have to find the happy medium of by increasing that dryback, but still having enough nutrients to support rapid plant growth once it roots. So 1.3 EC is kind of where I've landed, where I then rapidly increase it to what I'm going to be using in veg once it's fully rooted. But going backwards, going to a lower EC, you're absolutely going to get roots, but I don't believe you're going to get the most robust growth possible once that plant starts to root. So I think that's
That's
kind of what
basically the
Gabby's,
same thing that I said.
it's what you were talking about, but there is like some actual scientific evidence as to why that might be the case that it is. So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm still doing more testing. Hopefully, I have something published on my Patreon about it in the near future, but that's like on top of podcasting and working and living a normal life. So
You
I
know,
don't put a whole lot into it.
one thing that I'll say is with anything, we can make it more or less complicated. And, hopefully when we're making it more complicated, there's a reason for it, right? Like because of the benefits that we see. But sometimes, like you said, you just have to go to the middle and it's what works for you. And as long as in the end of the day, you have healthy rooted clones, it doesn't matter. And now, if you're having a problem rooting your clones, then that's when you say, all right, wh- but I just don't want to make it. I wanted this to be a simple video.
Well, let's
Like,
say this then, right? If you want to clone your plant, get a glass of water, put some water in it, take a cutting and stick it in that water, and change that water out every day. It'll probably root.
Mhm.
Like the chances are greater than not that it will root. And you can take that plant and put it in some potting mix, and boom, you have a copy of your plant. That's as simple as you can go with it. Shit, I've seen people just take a cutting and stick it in some wet soil and it roots. It, even if they don't put a dome over it or something, because it'll eventually acclimate, if it's not too terrible health, to the environment that it's in, and it'll root from there. So there's endless possibilities of how to clone your plants. And so we do digress a little bit, and we start to talk about like the finite points of how we specifically do it, but there's so many options for it.
But
And
you know, I guess one of the things that I want to do is focus on like what I think is really important. Okay. And then after we have the like what I think is very important, then the conversation can go anywhere. Right.
yeah,
But one thing, to digress, one thing that I think is very important is how you water your clones.
talk about it.
And um, what I do is fairly psychotic. And I think you do the same thing. So we're both
Probably.
psychos, or you a little bit. I think you told me the way you do it is a little bit different. But I don't flood these trays. Okay.
Never.
You know, um, the,
That's how
the
you touch
trays,
in roots.
the trays have holes in the bottom. And so what I've done is I put a fitting on the end of my garden hose, and it's actually the one that would like work for my RO system. Okay, so like it has a garden hose thread, and then it has a smaller tubing that comes out of it. I don't know what size it is, but it's fairly small. And I will just like pull out my tray, and I'll go through the rows, and I hand water my clones.
So
Okay,
I do the same thing, and I hand water each
you
clone,
turn
but
sideways, right?
I have mine up on on a stand. So I actually use two of the Grodan inserts sitting over a basin that I then take the tray with the clones and I sit on top, and then I use just like an open wand and I spray from the top down at like a
Yeah, I don't
low rate
spray
of
the
flow.
foliage.
No, not the foliage, just the top of the coin, the cocoa coin
Yeah.
down. But I will only water the clones that need it. And so only when they've dried back a little bit will I water them. If you water just because you have a whole tray and you're watering the whole thing, and if you're keeping, people will say wet feet, right? If you're keeping the clone wet for too long in between drybacks, that clone is never gonna root
I mean,
in a proper timeline.
I don't have the same experience as you. My experience is when I take that thing out of the dome, okay, maybe the first day it doesn't need water. But at that point, it's rooted,
Yep.
okay, and they're trying to grow and they're transpiring more.
Right.
And
So
I
yeah.
put water on every plug every day, because if I don't, the next day, even if it's not wilted, the soil will be hydrophobic.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for rooted
So
clones, absolutely, you want to. I think like watering them every day is pretty important just to
you
replenish
water
the
them
nutrients
once they're rooted,
once they're
those things.
rooted.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you know the things when I take them out of the dome, they're rooted because
but
that's
I
why
hit
it's
drybacks
just
before they're
normal.
rooted through my method.
Oh
So
yeah, that's
that's where we
different.
have the differing
Yeah,
approaches there. So like I could see a lot of
that's the
benefit
most
from how you're
critical
going about
time.
it, though.
So it's funny because you when you were saying that there's an advantage to the way I grow, that they don't have to get watered so much, and maybe I should have said, man, I really I need to do it because really I want them to dry back more,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when
Yep.
they dry back more, that's when they're going to root faster. And so since I want them to
Right.
dry back more, really I got to just dry those domes more. And then when I do that, I have to watch out. Now that's the one advantage of the way I do it, is that I don't have to watch out for the watering,
Right.
because
Well,
you know
and because you have
never
the different
with the
cultivars, right? So like you have the different rooting times on it, so it's just more advantageous to keep it in an ideal rooting environment for longer rather than pushing for roots as fast as you possibly can if you're doing like one tray of a single cultivar and you know that it's like I got this much foliage. Look at this guy. Yeah, you're like, I got this much foliage on each clone across the tray, and it's gonna dry back at this rate. So I'm gonna dry it out real good in between each day, the dome, right? And you're getting pushing that dry back really quick. So, sorry, I got distracted by you. So that way you can irrigate it like what I'm doing, where if you're just hitting the ones that dry back faster just due to some sort of inconsistency in the cocoa coir makeup within the coins, because the coins themselves are not consistent. Some of them are larger or smaller. I think the largest variance that I've seen is like 70%, where one of them, or not 75, sorry, 35%, where like one of them was like a solid 35% larger than the smallest one. So the drybacks on those are going to be vastly different if it's just through evaporation, and then if it's also through rooting and the actual uptake of water, then a smaller one's going to dry back instantly, where a bigger one isn't going to dry back that quickly. So that's why I like to make sure that I'm only irrigating the ones that need it, mainly because like even look, someone just said it right in the chat, roots need
yeah.
oxygen, so you need those drybacks for the oxygen. And I'm sorry, I think my partner's actually showing up right now from work, so my dog's gonna go a little bit crazy. But Gabby, I'm gonna mute really quick and let you take it away
No
for a second.
worries. So yeah, I think Ran Hen is the guy that asked me at least 30 to 3,000 times to make a video on how we make clones. So this one's for you, buddy. And to the other people watching, the last time I checked, we had 11 likes, and now we have 77. So
Yeah, good job, people.
I think it's going good. And we have 113 people watching. I would I'm gonna take another moment. I think it's been like an hour since I did it again. If you guys would take a minute and just share this live so we can see like how many people we can peek out at um, watching live, that would be a great experience for us. And we didn't really, you know, promote this as much, and nobody knows that we're doing it. So grateful for all you guys watching. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've kind of touched on most of the cloning process, and so the idea of these lives for all the viewers, right, is we're going to try and touch on a different subject. So maybe next time we'll pick it up on veg, so we can talk more about mother plants, right, vegetative plants. We can talk about the different uppotting practices and sort of different practices that you might use to maintain populations of plants or like for yourself, you maintain mothers so that you can clone from them. For myself, I produce a lot of vegetative plants for production. So both of those kind of have value, but within sort of that vegetative realm of this whole cycle of a grow. But we do have a few more questions that I think we should get through before we start talking a little bit about some of the things that
We
you
know
wanted
we
to
have a
talk
limit.
about. We don't have a limit, but we are getting up on the 2 hour mark. And I
Your
know that
dog's
that's
excited for you.
my dog's excited to see my partner. Uh, and so I know that 2 hours is kind of usually where we go to with these, but we can keep going. I mean, the questions might take us off into a whole bunch more, but I just, considering we sort of got through all the way up to where we have rooted clones, right? So the next step is transplant. I say we pause it there in terms of the cloning process and sort of the cycle of a grow overall. Maybe next time we can also talk about popping seeds because that's also part of the vegetative process. So, but for
And
now,
of
we do
course,
have
we're
some
going to want to talk
questions.
about tissue culture.
Yeah, I mean, tissue culture is another form of propagation. We're gonna do a tissue culture roundtable. I'm actually talking to a few different people about, like, one of our previous guests, Jesse Locke. He's gonna come on, and then we've had a few other people that do tissue culture, like PNW Cultivar. He's I don't know if anybody's following his Instagram lately, but his tissue culture journey has really started to uh, take a few leaps forward. He has a lot of stuff going right now. We can bring Cosmic back on, talk about kind of where he's at with tissue culture on his journey. But yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so many more topics we're going to talk about. So I'm pretty sure that we can at least kind of cut it here in sort of the linear progression of a grow. We have our clones rooted now. So if you were going to start with clones, then this is where you'd be at in terms of going into veg. But we do have some questions from Instagram that I've gathered prior to this that I wanted to touch on to get your opinion on. So we already went over the shelf life of a bottle of Clonex, but one of the questions that we had from a few different people actually was, where do you like to take clones from on a plant and why? Do you prefer top of the plant or the bottom of the plant, or even the middle of the plant? But it was kind of posed as a dichotomous question of, do you take it from the top or do you take it from the bottom and why? You go first.
I generally only take top clones, and you know, I I generally never take clones off of the bottom of the plant. But what's important to me is, like, I'm not doing the best job describing it, but hopefully I did a good job showing it earlier of what I want the clone to look like. So it may not be at the very top of the plant, but it could be one level lower, and it can be a perfect clone that looks like this. Then I'm fine with that. You
Yep.
know. So that's what I do. But I'll never take the, like, real undercarriage on the bottom. I just trim that stuff off, and if I don't trim it off, it's just because I'm too busy, and I should trim it off because
Yep.
that's never going to be a clone.
Yeah, I agree. I think that top of the plants is where I like to go for, and it's not necessarily because of where, like, the location of the plants of the clones are. Like, it's not like I'm choosing from the top of the plant. I'm just choosing the clones that are the most uniform. I
Right.
want
That's what I said. I know how
yeah,
it wants to look.
like, you want those internodal spacings to be similar, especially if you're doing it for production, right? Because you want to make sure that you have enough production sites, like nodes that are going to form into the branches that you get like these nice big bushy plants off of. So like Gabby's showing, right, you have consistency. There's nodes like two nodes and then a node with a leaf and then multiple nodes up at the top. Like it's very uniform across the entire clone from each of the two cuttings. Even though there are some slight variances in and actual spacing between the nodes, the overall style of the plant is the same. So that's kind of what I go for is, making sure that you are pulling from whatever is going to produce the most uniform clones. And also, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is there is some use for tissue, like cuttings that you can take from the bottom of the plant. And, I just mentioned him before, but Jesse from Mothership Labs, one of the things that he brought up on his podcast is that if you are doing tissue culture, you might find it more advantageous to take cuttings from the bottom of the plant because there is going to be a larger concentration of hormones in older plant tissue in general. So if you're taking cuttings from the bottom of the plant, you're going to have potentially more of those endogenous hormones that are going to aid in the success rate of your tissue culture plant. But since we're talking about clones, uniform upper cuttings seem to be the best option of approach. Let's see. So, this is a question that we'll probably touch on next time, but it's how long do you keep moms around? And I think that that's very dependent. But, just as a sort of teaser for that, I know that for myself, I only keep moms around as long as I need to. So at the max, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months if I really didn't have a good round of clones from it in the last round where I needed something to stay around so that I could replace it with. But, 90 days max typically.
90 days?
90 days max. Max.
Yeah. Sometimes they hang around longer. I would say never longer than 150 days.
Sure.
But like sometimes it's not even 60 days.
Yeah,
Like
no. Sometimes it's 40 days.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I have a bunch of them behind them, but I'd say 90 days. I'm always going, I'm generally always going past 90 days unless it's something that I'm not really producing. It's just something that I'm holding, because
Yeah.
60 days in, it really starts getting productive as far as
Yeah.
shade production.
For sure. If you are
I mean,
doing
something
something
to
that
be,
is like for production, then yeah, like sometimes a bigger plant, you do get a little bit more of that uniform growth at the like 50 to 60-day mark. But if it is just for genetic preservation and it's, three clones and I'm on to the next one.
Mhm.
Let's see. We can. So we did also talk about the benefits and drawbacks of different medias. So I think we talked about that. Callus Tech. Do you want to talk about sort of your thoughts on Callus Tech? Because I know that you and I have different thoughts on different thoughts on this. Callus Tech being where you are promoting the formation of a callus at the cut end of a clone prior to it rooting. This being something that should technically happen in most cases either way, but if you're doing it through certain techniques, you're trying to promote a more robust callus growth. And tell us, Gabby, what are your thoughts on that?
I feel like this subject proves how old I am because I want to be stubborn and not believe that Callus Tech, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, even after hearing why people think that it's a good way to go, it doesn't make sense to me because for me, the media is like protection. Like if you cut yourself and you put a bandage over it to protect yourself from infection.
Yeah,
And when you have an open wound, open to the entire environment, I just feel like you should be more prone to infection. But
sure.
I have no data to prove it. It's just the old man in me thinking like, if I have a wound, why wouldn't I want to cover it?
Well, so
And
the best way I've heard that described is similar to a callus on a plant. It's going to be similar to a scab or the callusing of a wound on a human, right? So if you keep that area wet, you're not going to form a callus as readily as if you allow for some sort of air exchange with that area. So something like a permeable band-aid or something is going to allow for a callus to form. And so when you're doing a callus tech
Do we
with a
need
cannabis plant,
a permeable band-aid for cannabis plants?
quite possibly. I mean, sure, you could use some sort of semi-permeable membrane that you're putting over the cut end of the plant.
Damn, we're
But
live.
but what you can do also is by keeping a domed clone tray where the entire environment is nice and humid, you're keeping enough moisture where the plant isn't going to wilt, but it's dry enough with enough available oxygen for that cut end of the plant to actually callus over. So what people will do is they'll like take the clone, stick it all the way through, say like a Rockwell cube, which seems to be the most ideal substrate to use for this technique. You stick it all the way through, and then you're actually cutting the clone at a perfect perpendicular so that it's completely flat. You push it through the bottom of the rock wool and then you push it back up so it's flush with the rock wool. And that keeps the plant nice and moist so that it allows for the turgor to stay there and the plant to stay healthy, but you're providing this high moisture, high oxygen environment for that cut end to callus over. And the theory behind it is that you're going to create basically a clean wound covering so that there's less potential for pathogens to enter through an open wound. And knowing what I've seen
Because
in
it
terms
heals
of,
faster.
sorry,
Because it heals faster.
well, because it's a physical barrier.
Allison is healing.
Well, the callus would become a physical barrier to that
Sorry.
cut part of the plant that's going to then go into substrate that could have biological activity in there, other things like that that could potentially be a vector for pathogen to the plant. So that callus is going to help prevent that. But like it is something where, this leads us into another question that we got was, should we clone hollow stem plants or not? And when you're doing something with like a callus technique, it's less advantageous to have a hollow stem because that whole opening is an open it's an open pathway for any sort of viral pressure pathogen, waterborne disease or something like that to enter into the plant. So the answer to that is like if you have hollow stems, that's a nutrient deficiency. There's some genetics that are more prone to having hollow stems, but in general, you can fix a lot of that by increasing your calcium and boron into the plant because that's what helps form the pith within that stem. That's going to be
You
like
think
your
that's
solid
true?
stem.
You think that's true for seedlings? Because I've
I've
seen in
seen
the
seedling plants that
past,
have just massive holes in them, but
right?
usually what I've seen
Pay
there is
attention.
that their vigor outcompetes their rate of nutrient assimilation. So they're actually not able to form enough pith because they're growing too fast. And so you can curb that through
I
your
would-
irrigation practices and environmental controls. But if you're just like running wild with that, then it could still form a hollow stem. But like in an ideal,
Seedlings, I think have the
that's a
ability
different
sometimes.
situation. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that because you said that if you have hollow stems, you got a nutrient problem. I think that's generally the case, but
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that seedlings definitely have a higher propensity for that to happen with it being something that is less controllable. But if you do have like a time tested and proven cultivar, then you should be able to grow it without having hollow stems if you are meeting specific nutrient targets within your
well,
feed.
to give you an example, um, like the type of lighting you're using has a lot to do with it. Like if you're
Sure.
indoors, like back when, I started growing using like T5 fluorescents were much more common for veg even, right? And because those lights would be right on top of the plants, it would encourage real compact growth and you won't get those hollow stems.
Yep.
Even
Yeah,
on
blue light definitely helps keep the
right?
plant compact.
If you have the plant really far away from a high pressure sodium light and it wants to run, You
Sure.
know,
You're going to get a shade response that way either way, so you're definitely going to have some sort of cellular elongation. But like typically also when you have HPS, you have a higher fraction of red light, and red light's going to cause cellular elongation rather than cellular widening. So blue light being something that would cause more cellular widening, so it wouldn't actually cause the plant to be as stretchy as we would call it. So if you're in a low light HPS setting, yeah, you're going to get stretchy plants. But if you're in a high light situation, you're providing it enough light where it shouldn't stretch out too much and not go into that shade response thing. But with blue light, if you add enough blue, even to something that's at a lower PPFD, you
but
shouldn't get
also
as much.
close.
Yeah, you shouldn't get as much of a stretch. So, like you're saying, with like a compact fluorescent where it has that higher blue fraction, keeping it close to the plant as well, it shouldn't stretch too much, and you should be able to promote like the full assimilation of nutrients required to build like the proper cellular structure of the pith and the phloem and xylem and the whole plant and everything. So that's kind of I think that the two tie in together. That's why I wanted to bring them up at the same time, where hollow stems and callus tech kind of go hand in hand, where you can't really have hollow stems to produce an adequate callus to prevent pathogens from entering the plant, but you can use callus to help prevent pathogens from entering the plant, and that's kind of the main benefit for it, is just to produce a plant that you have at at the highest peak potential of health to use as, say, like a stock plant for a mother, or if you are just doing it for genetic preservation, just to try and have the healthiest possible plant possible. I
So can
said
I ask you a
possible a
question?
bunch. Yeah,
You don't do this, right?
I don't.
Right. So
No, it's
I
a
think
pain in the ass.
I think it was important to stop there and say this because this is what
It's
I
a
was
good
saying.
point.
It's what I was
I do
saying
it for
before.
fun.
Right. But it's what we were talking about before about how you can take this to, every next level. Like we could make an independent aeroponic cloning chamber for one cutting, so we're not risking. It's like there comes a point where it's like what
Is it worth it?
actually makes the most sense, and
Yeah,
you, like you said, you were doing some things that I wasn't doing, and it's just as far as like, and cleanliness is important to me, but like my weak point could be um the rooting hormones. Now, what I'll say is, in doing testing, it doesn't appear that I'm spreading virus.
sure.
So,
Especially if you don't have any
like,
to
so
start off
that's kind
with.
of showing me that, like, because I've done it like this for a long time. So, if that was a major problem, I would have fucked myself over already pretty hard a few times
Sure.
already. So I think just from, and I'm not suggesting anyone, take, do what I do here, but I think that the virus doesn't like living in that solution, and or that the cuttings are in there for such a brief period of time. I don't know. But I
Well,
don't feel like I've been spreading virus by dipping in the same rooting hormone. And I think if it was a gel, I don't know. There'd be more of a chance of that because you take
sure.
the gel and then you scrape it off, and now you know, I don't know.
I think
I
that
am very
that's
tempted to try a powdered hormone again, but I mean, it's a safety hazard. Yeah, I don't think I can do it. Like
yeah,
breathing in that dusty powder, I'm already like, yeah. So,
for sure.
but that's
Well,
something I do. More
let's go
questions?
on to another question. How late is too late to clone? And so, to provide a little bit of
And he's talking
additional
about before a
information here.
plant is flowering.
Well, I think, yeah, like how late is it too late to clone a plant? And I'm assuming that it means into flower. And so, one of our previous guests on The Way We Grow, DK from Sugar Ship Labs, his methodology for doing pheno hunts is he clones at week or at day 14 of flower so that it's has a little bit of a re-veg time. It slows down the rooting process and the grow out process so that he can have a small plant by the time he's starting to make his selections from that pheno hunt, so that he doesn't have a huge footprint for preserving those genetics in the phenohunt. So, two
I
weeks
think you
into
cross
flower
it, but everything
is
you're
a
telling
is a
me
great
makes me
answer.
cringe.
Oh, for sure. Like, it's not something I would ever personally do. I would want to make sure that I'm backing it up ahead of time. He also flowers out the seed plant. I don't flower out seed plants for pheno hunts because that's not going to be the same genetic representation as a cutting, just due to slight somoclonal variations that could occur from a seed plant to a cutting. So that's a whole another conversation. But 2 weeks into flower, you can easily take a cutting and you don't need to do anything special for it. But I think that one thing that I've seen people do before is they've, like, monster cropping is a thing where you're taking a cutting well deep into flower where a full bud has already formed, and you're doing that so that you can get this re-veg on the bud and a bunch of tops coming out of that bud. And some people, like, the old idea was that it was you're monster cropping it to get a monster crop because it's going to produce so many tops eventually when it does veg back out, and then when you subsequently flower it back out again. But it's not really ideal. Like, we've come to realize that's not ideal. It takes forever for it to flower and re-veg, or for it to root and re-veg and then grow back out. It's just not it's not an ideal use of time, but you can absolutely revert something from flower through a cloning process late into the flowering process. So I don't think that there's ever anything that's too late, especially when you can re-veg the whole flower plant. But it is important to know that it gets harder the longer you go into the flowering cycle to clone that plant.
And it creates undesirable growth at first
Yeah,
that has to grow
exactly.
out of. You won't get normal leaves, So if you take a cutting with the intent of flowering it, okay? So, what's the sugar ship guy's name again?
DK.
Yeah, DK. Um, he has a reason why he does it, right? Because he's trying to slow things down so that he could just keep a lot of stuff in a small space. I get it. And, but my reaction to it was like, man, I don't really want to slow things down. If you wanted to grow the clones, like to flower them out, and you took them in week 3 of flower, when they rooted and started growing, they'd be producing abnormal growth. So you wouldn't be able to and they grow much slower at first.
Yep.
So like if you want to take a clone to actually keep growing and continue with, I would say don't cut it after 1 week into flower. And
Sure.
even that is too late.
Yep.
Generally I would recommend cutting your clones before they flower, whether it was and before you put them into flower indoors or before they show flowers outside.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I know that there was a really popular thing to do, especially when you had like a 6 week veg time where you would veg out all your plants. You'd take the top cutting from each of your plants, right? Right as you were flipping it to flower, like literally the day before or the day of. And then you'd root all those out. 2 weeks later, you transplant them, you veg them out for 6 weeks, and boom, you've already finished your 8 week cycle that you're flowering those plants out with. And you can just pop those right into the same room a week later or whatever after you've cleaned it. So that's a good way to have sort of that cycle going. But I personally wouldn't ever want to clone something from flower if that's like if the goal is to keep your genetics around or to keep some sort of
Like let's say the
genetic
clones died.
preservation.
Let's say you took clones before flowering and you put
And
your
it's
plant in
dying.
the
Yeah,
flowers
then take a
and then
clone.
die. Exactly.
Absolutely. But
Then
it should not be your first approach. And
right.
that's I think that we both agree on that. All right, another question, and this might be a little bit more personal and anecdotal,
Do you
but
think we should after this question? Let's go to live questions from the chat.
yeah, let's do that. Well, we have let's see, we have a few more here. Let me just get
Okay.
through them really quick. So can you successfully clone an autoflower? We'll start there because that's an easy one to answer. The answer is no, because it has a genetic clock that doesn't allow it for you to slow down that genetic clock through a vegetative cycle like that you have control over through your photoperiodism. But I mean, you can clone one, but it might just start flowering in the cloning process. I've seen people root get roots off of autoflower clones before, but it's never something where you can use it to preserve that genetic. So like the answer in the long run is no, and no because it doesn't make any sense to clone an autoflower. Not necessarily because you can't, but because it has a genetic clock that's already started and that it's not going to change through some sort of environmental manipulation that you can do.
So what would happen, Nick, if let's say you take a clone off of an autoflower, okay? Okay, so let's say you have a field of autoflowers, right? So you can take endless cuts off of them.
Well, you can't take
And
endless cuts because they're gonna die at one point when they're done flowering.
no, I'm talking about for one time, right?
So
I'm
you
not
can,
saying,
okay,
okay, if you were to bring those inside and they would flower right away, they would still grow vertically flower, right? I mean,
not necessarily.
well, I've never done it. I don't mess with autoflowers, but is it possible that you could get like just spears growing?
Well, but what would be the point of it, right? Like, so if the point is
Because you
to,
can.
I mean, I
It
guess
sounds
if you
interesting to
can,
me. It
sure,
sounded interesting to me. Like,
yeah, just flower it in the clone dome.
huh?
Just flower it in the clone room. Then, I mean, it won't get much bigger by the time that you're done cloning it because one of the main things that triggers autoflowers to flower is abiotic stress. So people have seen transplants cause autoflowers to flower because they've messed with the root zone too much. Fluctuations in heat or temperature, like temperature, humidity, light intensity, can cause flowering to occur in autoflowers. And so, if you're taking a cutting off of it, putting it into an extremely high heat, high humidity environment from like an temperate veg environment, that automatically is going to be a lot of stress onto the genetics of the plant. So it could trigger flowering right there.
I'm saying if it did, you would just get a little bud. You wouldn't
Yeah,
get like,
no, I
um,
mean, if it depends on at what point it roots in
or
the flowering
exactly
cycle.
how what type of autoflower it is, right?
Sure, it depends on
It's like
like that initiation
there's a
period
lot
of
of plants.
flowering.
Okay, so if you take, and you know this guy, the Dank Shredder, and I think he's in our chat, so we'll say hello. But he posted a picture of alien rock candy that he flowered from a rooted cutting. You know,
Right, but that's it's not an autoflower.
right,
There's, I mean, the difference between like so autoflowers being non-photo period based flowering plants and photo period based cannabis plants that require an adjustment in the photo period to initiate flowering. So that's why like with autoflowers they have an internal clock. Once they are planted, that internal clock starts. You can speed up that internal clock, but it's damn near impossible to slow down that internal clock.
well, it's kind of the same. Well, not the same, but like for instance, when you plant a seedling of cannabis, if you take a clone of it right away and try to flower it, I don't know because they people say to do that with males, but for me, if you take a clone off of an immature cannabis plant, it just doesn't want to flower right away.
I
Like
mean,
it,
it
like
it
takes
wouldn't
time to
off,
grow.
but you're using your anecdotal evidence
Immature.
from an immature
Right.
photo period plant, right? Not
Yeah.
an autoflower plant.
Right. I don't know. Just to know, I've never grown an autoflower plant. There's never been like an attraction for me to do that.
Nah,
Um,
I've
but
grown a few, but it's not fun.
I will say that I went to one farm, and this was years ago, and so like I feel like it's gotten a lot better. But I went to this farm, and they were growing autoflowers, and it was beautiful.
Sure.
They were small, okay. They were like all like you had to bend down to them, maybe 2.5, 3 feet tops. But they were beautiful. They smelled good. I didn't smoke any because it was all slow growing. But he said they grow them because they're easy and because they
Yeah,
can like field plant the seeds and just put irrigation on them and they grow. And then like the next time they touch the plant is when they harvest.
for
And
sure.
their cost per pound to grow it this way was like nothing,
Yeah,
like
I mean, for like our
$25
outdoor,
a pound.
we didn't really plant the outdoor until around what would have been like the first week of July. I think no, end of June, first or start of July. So we could have easily gotten in a full cycle of an autoflower in the field had we planted in, beginning of March or something like that.
Hmm.
But I guess it really depends on like what you're growing it for. If you're growing it for concentrate, if you're growing it for just like additional yield.
To them, it was 100% like they don't care. Somebody's gonna come in and like
Yeah,
price per pound was like sub $30. You know, so
it's just something to help supplement the farm. I get it. I mean, I think that it's
you're
a
right because they weren't just a cannabis farm. They were growing
yeah,
other stuff like right on the adjacent property. And they
yeah.
turned part of it into cannabis, but it was all sorts of vegetables, and then they got a license so that they could do it. But like I said, what was really cool, and I haven't been to your place, Nick, um, but it was really cool to see acres of cannabis growing in a field.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
It's like, you stand there and, it kind of brings me back. And now we're getting to like your weed stories type conversation. But when I went to Jamaica, that was like 1990, I think it was 1990. I saw plants growing in the ground on a hillside. It
Yeah,
was fuck,
it's pretty
like
cool.
it was, I was living in New York, and I had never seen that. At that point, I didn't even know about. I think maybe it was 1989 or 1990. I didn't even know
I
about
think
going inside really. Like it wasn't.
anybody that needs to know a
Innovative.
little bit more about that time in your life should go back to the Way We Grow podcast, like 3 episodes ago or so, where Gabby was the actual guest. So go back and listen to that. He tells about his whole Jamaica experience. But
I
we
forget.
we
Pick that up.
digress a little bit, so I'm going to get us back on track. We have a few more questions to get through here, and then we can open it up to a little bit of the live chat questions and some of the stuff that you wanted to touch
Nick
on,
runs a
Gabby.
tight ship.
I do, but we're getting up there in time, and life beckons away. So let's see. One of the questions was, what's your favorite strain to clone versus strains that always give you a hard time, and why does this happen? And so I I find that there are some strains that give a harder time, but typically it's because they're not as healthy as mothers as they could be. I do always have ones that seem to always have an issue, but they also grow really funky, and so they could have some sort of viral pressure that I just haven't been able to test for yet. That being said, I've seen people have struggles with certain genetics, and we've even talked about it earlier in the show that if you're doing a mixed tray of clones of mixed genetics, some are going to root at different times, and you typically see a whole block of clones from one genetic root around the same time or have a similar rooting window. And if there's another one that's vastly different, you will see that rooting window within that same environment, considering you're keeping the doma and the doming protocols on that one tray the same for both. You'll see the difference in the rooting time. So I don't really know what causes that. It might be genetics itself. There might be some sort of endogenous hormonal concentration in one versus another. I don't know. I haven't done any testing
I
on that.
think I think age really hurts.
Yep.
You know,
Sure.
I remember like taking clones off of seedlings, and within 3 days they were like pushing roots out of the cubes. And like with a mature mother plant, or even clones taken off of clones, I never see, I don't see roots in less than 10 days, to be honest with you. And I could probably speed things up if I did things like we talked about, like dry the inside of the dome so that the cubes
But
are drying out a little bit
you don't
faster.
see roots in under 10 days?
Yeah, normally it's right around 10 days where
Okay.
they start rooting for me. And, I think it's a combination of I'm having to play to the middle, not being able to open them up as fast as I would. Um, and then also the varieties that I grow, So
Yeah.
one thing that I always used to say, and other people talked about it, was the Chem 91 was always a very difficult plant to root.
I I could
So
believe that. Yeah.
this would take longer. Doesn't have a lot of like good foliage on it to cut on. So
Well, that kind of wraps it up for all the questions that I had. And so we can kind of open it up. If anybody in the chat has any questions about cloning in general, maybe tag Gabby Staten Island or myself, Mr. Wolf Grows. We can answer a couple of those questions. And then we'll we'll maybe do 10, 15 minutes of that. And then Gabby has some things he wants to talk about, and we can kind of wrap it up after that. But while you guys get those questions together, I'm going to go use the restroom.
I'm grabbing some water.
There is a little bit of a delay in between the time you guys ask the questions and I see it in the chat. So I'm going to have to basically talk to myself and entertain myself for a minute. Maybe if I just sit here and choke on this pen for a minute, then some questions will start coming up. Stick a straw under the dome and circulate breath as you meditate. Alrighty. Or like have a hose over your face like a gas mask that runs air to your garden. Yes, rooting clones and chosen techniques depend a bit on the cultivar. Like I said, sometimes you have to do something that works for all of them. You know, you can't have a different cloning technique for one cultivar that you have for the rest of them. 7 to 14 days, water in a cup. Change water every other day. That's how my mom used to root plants on the windowsill. I mean, I think everyone knows that this is my favorite plant right here. The Chem 91. You know, and I'd be telling you things that most of you already know.
I'm back. Let's see. Where did we get? Did we get some questions?
The dip and grow shelf life, I think, is pretty good until it gets open. You know, like I think if you have a sealed bottle, you know, it's good for years. But once you open it, I don't know, it tends to get funky after a while. I don't know why, because I keep it really sealed up. So
Yeah.
I only buy the really small bottles because they make like a big bottle. But, you know, and I use a fair amount of it. So, but I just buy the small bottles and then throw them away because at the end of the bottle, and I always shake it up as I showed in the video.
Yeah, I think that it does have a decently long shelf life because it does use alcohol in the aqueous solution that you get, so that's fairly stable for the different chemicals that they dissolve into it. And like endyl-3 butyric acid, and I believe that it also has naphthalene acetic acid, are both fairly stable in the solution there. The only issue that you might have is maybe if some sort of bacteria or something gets into it, but that has to be some strong ass bacteria to survive in there. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. And I've had stuff like dip and grow sit around for like 2 or 3 years, and I went back to it and it worked fine.
Somebody says,
Scrape the stems or not? Why? No, don't scrape the stems. You're just opening up more points of potential pathogen vectors. It's just you're like you wouldn't. I don't know, if you get a cut, you wouldn't cut the skin around it for it to heal faster. Because the main point of like doing the cut is you want the clone to heal once you get it into that clone cube or into whatever cloning environment you have it in. And by scraping it, you're just exposing more of the like open sap to whatever environment is. So you're just opening it to potential pathogens. I know that a lot of people used to do that and would swear by it. But I've tried it side by side, and I don't see any faster rooting, and I tend to see in larger populations a lower success rate with scraped clones, especially if you're putting them into like an aeroponic cloner. You're just opening yourself to more potential problems.
somebody asked if you have to cut at the node. And we talked about that
Yeah, you
earlier.
don't.
You don't.
It
I just
helps,
want the
but it's not
response.
necessary.
Yeah. So one question that has not been asked, but always gets asked, so I'll just cut it off is, do you cut at a 45-degree angle?
So I no longer cut at a 45-degree angle
And
because a 45-degree angle on a cylinder opens up more surface area than a straight across cut. And so under the same
do you make a
idea,
straight across cut? Do you make sure that it's straight across?
I make it as straight across as possible, but I don't like aim for it to be perfect. I just, since I'm using a razor blade, I just make a slice across usually 3 cuttings at a time,
And so you cut
and
on a cutting board?
I cut it on a cutting board that gets wiped down with bleach. Yep.
How often do you wipe it down with bleach? Every
Between each
spray?
cultivar. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Just considering I'm usually cloning at a higher volume, I don't segregate it on a plant by plant basis. I just do it on a culture or cultivar by cultivar basis, and do a 10% bleach solution wipe down and then give it like 35-40 seconds between between the wipe down and the next cuttings on it. But yeah, I'll just go straight across the cutting and insert it into the media from there after dipping it in whatever rooting hormone I'm using. But the 45-degree angle, I think that one of the main reasons why that was very successful for people is that when they had weak stems where they weren't providing adequate nutrients to the plant, the 45-degree angle allowed for almost like a sharp incision point into the substrate. So like if it's a root right cube, a cocoa coin, especially rock wool, that 45 sort of point kind of allows for it to push into that media very easily, but it doesn't necessarily provide the most ideal surface area for a rapid heal.
People would always say that they felt like there was more surface area and that was good, because it would make more surface area for the cutting to root.
Right.
And, my response to all this, to be honest with you, is I don't make a straight cut or an angle cut. I'm, you know, I'm just cutting it at the right place,
Yep.
and if it's a little bit at an angle or a little bit straight, I'm certainly not going to cut it again because it just doesn't matter.
Yep.
That's what I think. Like, you can get down to the level and be like, well, you got a little bit more surface area that could be infected, or you could take the argument a little bit more surface area to root. The reality is it just doesn't matter. And
Yep.
if you
If
have
if
a
you
lot of clones, it's just too much work to
like
put stock on doing that.
do a bunch of clones and then just for for your own edification, because I have done this before with 50 clones because I wanted to know in rock wool. I just cut them all open, and I ripped the rock wool open to see where they rooted out of, and 9 times out of 10 it did not root out of the exact point of the cutting. So providing a larger surface area
Right.
would not have provided a better
Well, the other thing
rooting rate
is
no matter what.
the other thing is they say it allows the stem to uptake more water while it's
Sure.
not. And I don't
But
think
that's not how.
there.
But we talked about that earlier too, with the osmotic gradient between the low EC substrate solution and the higher EC phloem and xylem of the plant. It's going to pull water in no matter what, as long as you're not feeding it like 6.0 EC in the clone substrate. It's going to be able to pull water from the cloning substrate pore water.
I use scissors.
Yep, he uses scissors. I use scissors to prep the clones and razor blades to make the final incision. Let's see what else we got in here.
One thing that I'll say that we both do is we both, excuse me, we both put the clones in a sulfur bath wash. And,
We use a wash. Use sulfur. I'll use typically horticultural oil or xerotol, just because I use so many different oil-based integrated pest management sprays that I don't like using sulfur to limit what I have available when I'm spraying down my mother plants and stuff like that. But sulfur is
Well, just,
ideal if you're dealing with mold or russet mites.
my answer to that is I think it's safe to and I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I think it's, oh, well, you've been putting oils on your mother plants.
Yes, that's why, like, for anybody listening, don't mix oils and sulfur. There are a few exceptions to that based on the structure of the oil. So like we've had a guest on before from Bioworks talking about their Azagard product and how they can mix that with sulfur in a spray or a dip because of the structure of the Azagard and how it's not actually the lipid structure is slightly different than what you would normally find in like a neem oil. So there are certain things that you can work with, but some that you can't. And so I just always say never use anything that's an oil with sulfur. You need at least like 14 days in between applications if you're going to use both. And even more ideally, you want to do some sort of wash spray with like plain water and maybe a surfactant in between doing oils and sulfurs. Because I don't want us to give out any sort of advice that someone's going to be like, oh, they said it was cool to mix this oil with sulfur
Oh, well,
to
let's just say
and then
this.
they melt their plants, because that'll happen.
We're not pest advisors. We're not allowed to give advice like that.
No,
So,
we can only tell you what we do.
yeah, we're not doing that. We're just telling you
Yep.
what we do.
But I think I don't see any more questions coming up. I see somebody talking about you don't need to clip the water leaves when you're doing clones, and you absolutely don't. It just helps with with environmental management in a larger set of clones. So
You
like
don't
if
want
you're
this.
yeah, you don't want a leaf overlapping the upper node of another clone, because that's going to severely stunt its ability to root as well as transpire and photosynthesize once it's rooted. So you have a whole bunch of potential issues there. You can spread out those clones in an environment, but if you're going for numbers and you want to fill a 50 cell of clones all the way full, or even go 25, checkerboarded, that's where what we were saying is when you pull the leaves up and you cut it, when those leaves open back up, you want that rough disc of leaves to look like the surface area required for that one space in the clone tray, so that it's not overlapping, but it gets the maximum amount of surface area possible to fully utilize all of that surface area for photosynthesis. But it's a delicate balance, and you can go over really easily and cut too much back, but you can also not cut enough off and cause a whole other set of potential issues with molds, mildews, pathogens, and things popping up within the environment just from there being too much plant matter there. The sulfur solution that Gaby uses, he just uses micronized sulfur, so you can find that through a bunch of different companies. One of the ones that is pretty popular is like microthiol sulfur. You can also get it from like Build a Soil. Again, not sponsored by anybody, but these are a few of the options that you have. And it's just like a wettable sulfur. So if you look up wettable sulfur, it should be pretty much what you need for that, and you can go anywhere from a teaspoon to 2 tablespoons per gallon depending on the level of pest or pathogen pressure that you have.
Or if you're just trying to do regular maintenance.
And so another thing here, Dead Rabbit just asked, and we did talk about this before, how's a clone uptake nutrients without roots? So you have that osmotic gradient, right? If the plant is pulling in water, it's going to pull in some of those nutrients with that water, and it's going to then still continue to provide that nutritional load to the metabolic pathways that are still photosynthesizing and things like that in the clone.
What's crazy is when the plants can really grow without roots, like in tissue
Yeah.
culture.
Yep.
When I see that, I'm always like, so I know that's
And
not
18 or 24, I'm assuming that they're talking about hours of light for your clones. I like 18 hours. I always like to give them a circadian rhythm, especially when you're matching the same time of day within a 24-hour period from the clone room into your veg space or your mother space, so that you're not missing a beat and not causing any sort of potential issues there. But 18, I've seen people use 24 hours, but I always feel like you tend to lose a little bit of overall clone health in doing that.
So can I feedback on that one?
Yeah.
So I have to keep my lights on for 24 hours because of certain genetics.
Okay.
And it could show that, this is a negative trait from this genetic that it goes to flower at 18 hours of light.
Wow, that's
But
fascinating though.
if you want to keep the genetic, you have to do what you have to do, right?
Sure. Which one is that?
Caps frozen lemons is one of them.
I mean, for
The other one,
people,
and I keep my lights on 24, so I'm not certain, but like I look at the alien rock candy,
yeah,
and I'm like, if I put this thing under 18 hours light, it's gonna want to flower.
I mean that's pretty helpful for people
And
that are in
think
an
about it.
upper area of the United States.
Yeah.
Think about it, because then it'll have a fast or an earlier triggering time if they're growing outdoors, and so they would be able to harvest it before the frost hits.
Well, the other thing it's good for is like if you are like a multi-level grower, like with LEDs, or if you're a tent grower, like because basically the plant doesn't want to grow. It just always wants to flower,
Yeah,
right? And so you're like holding it back from flowering. Then when you let it flower, it just doesn't grow,
sure.
right? So it doesn't stretch. It creates flower and you get, yield and bud off of it. But, plants like, for instance, the sour diesel is a nightmare in the sense that it will grow as far as you let it, you know?
Yeah,
Like, if I remember when we used to have plants that would be, 2 feet off the ground, right? And they went all the way up to the light bulb, the plants. And then when we lowered the tables down a foot lower, so it'd be like they'd still end up in exactly the same place because these plants have maximum stretch and are just gonna grow, So
yeah,
plants that don't stretch, that is a desirable trait,
yeah.
and like maybe you incorporate some of that into a plant that has excessive stretch, and you can get something that's actually good to grow, you
Yeah.
know. And the caps frozen lemons, the quality of the flower is amazing. But people complain. I had someone tell me, he's like, this plant's not growing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Everyone that I talk to about the plant, I always tell them like, and it's the same thing with the Mac 1, very slow veg plant. These
Very
are
slow.
both apulator strains from the same genetics. They do that, you know.
Yep.
So I used to have another plant that I lost because I thought someone else does have it. I won't mention their name, but I thought I'd be able to get it back from them. Um, it's it from Exotics.
Yeah.
That one was another plant that it wanted to just flower, but the advantage is like if you had multi-level LEDs, these are perfect.
Yeah.
They're plants that you can manage. You can control the height. If you're in a tent garden, and you're
It's
using an
helpful.
HID
Yeah.
light, it's like having a plant that doesn't want to grow, through the roof. It's
That's
an
helpful.
advantage. Yeah.
I think so. We have one more question here that I think we could
Okay.
answer, and then let's go into some of the other things that you wanted to talk about and some of the updates for Craft Growers Network that you wanted to touch on. But we'll go with this last question. How well rooted does the plug need to be before transplant? And I think it's very situationally dependent, in my opinion. But I do like the clones to be extremely well rooted before transplant in terms of having the most successful outcome possible. But I've also, done the pull test where if it doesn't come out of the root, the rooting substrate, I'm like, well, it's taken. It's at least calloused over or something. It's not moving. And if I'm running low on numbers, like if I need to fill a certain amount of transplants, I'll just throw it in there and see what happens.
Yeah. I generally will limit it to it has to have some roots coming out. If it has some roots coming out and I need to transplant them all, then I'll transplant them all. And
For
we'll see
sure.
what happens. If it remains the weakest one, it's gonna get culled.
Yep.
So generally last to root is, those are gonna get culled.
Yep.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for anybody else that had another question about cloning, you should feel free to reach out to Gabby or myself on Instagram or even here
yeah,
on YouTube.
the
Send
chat.
in more questions. Yeah, and the chat can continue. You can comment in the regular comment section, and we will try to reply to any questions that you have about cloning. If you have any specific questions about our specific styles of cloning, whether it be for Gaby within the retail space of clones or myself within the production side of clones. Both are, I think, very valuable opinions, but that have different sort of goals in mind when looking at them. So we might have a unique answer for you, but feel free to ask those questions. We are getting, yep, Louis Armstrong's been here the whole time. We're getting near the 3 hour mark. So I'm
Two
going
hours and
to,
30 some odd minutes.
yeah,
That's
2:46 right now. So we're crushing it. But Gabby, why don't you start or tell us a little bit about some of the things that you wanted to talk about during the show, some of the updates or your thoughts about, I don't know, recent events within your own grow world?
Well, I'll start by saying that before this podcast, I was like, Nick, I was like, I have some shit I want to talk about. I have some things I want to say. And then after sitting here for 2 hours and 35 minutes and, hitting my vape pen times with a couple of like choking points, now I'm like, holy shit. Now I'm like feeling a little under pressure to say what I feel. And there's no script or anything. So,
We'll just
and
let it fly.
yeah, there's 135 people here watching. So I
Yo,
appreciate
that's what's
every
up.
one of you. And
135.
like,
That's some
oh,
numbers.
now it's 133 because as I talk, people are just like, oh my
You're like,
God,
fuck this guy.
fuck this guy. I'm not going to talk shit about anyone. Just so that we know, this isn't about talking shit about anyone. Okay, we're back to 135. Um, it's talking about me, right? Oh my God, this
Somebody
is
just said you
terrible.
looked ripped.
I'm pretty ripped. These things work. Um, Earl Hill, more unpaid advertising. I love those guys.
We'll
I do.
get. We should see if Earl Hill wants to come on
Oh,
the podcast sometime.
no, he
Um,
does. He does. I already talked to him about it. I gave him your phone number, I think. Did he call you?
no,
Oh,
no, but
yeah.
tell him. We'll connect with that after the
Oh,
show.
my
We're
God,
getting
yeah.
off topic. Tell
Okay.
us some of these things you want to talk about.
I'm just trying to change the subject because now I'm
Yeah,
feeling
get
this.
out of here, you
Okay,
wise guy.
so I'm going to get to it. When people talk to me, they often will be like thanking me for what I've done, um, in regards to the chem dog and, even now with the sour. And I've said stuff like this before about how I don't want that to be my legacy. Like when I think about like the things that I've done, the things that I'm proudest of, like the whole driving the chem dog across the country, that was just like I'm like a part of the story, but it's not significant of an accomplishment to consider it a legacy. I mean, don't get me wrong, driving a plant across country, you know, there was always some fucking shady states where you were worried, and with no way of avoiding it. But you know, that I don't want that to be my legacy. And then I started thinking about like now that I've released this new sour and it's having a bunch of success, like I'm like, I don't want this to be my legacy. I don't want people to be like thanking me for this because this is my legacy, this new sour cut. Because it's not my cut. It's just a cut that I acquired, and like calling it the Gabby was just a big joke. And I don't know who this guy is. And, we're cool. Piff Coast Farms on Instagram. But we're cool. I have no idea who he is, but we had like friendly conversation afterwards. He made a post about how anybody that puts their name on a strain is a clown. And I was like, yeah, I'm a clown. And I was
It
clowning.
was supposed to be a joke.
Exactly. I was just clowning. And all this happened. But anyway, I don't want the sour to be my legacy because
I mean, the joke would have been, it would have hit just as well if you had called it, the asshole Joe cut. But, for anybody that needs a little reference as to what that means, go back and watch some of the earlier episodes, especially the one with your,
the
what's his,
weasel.
the weasel. You'll find out a little bit more about who asshole Joe is. I mean, if you put the two letters together, maybe you can figure it out as well. But, it's a joke, right? Like you don't name something after yourself because you're like, oh my god, look at me, I'm so fucking fancy. You do it because you're joking about it, especially in the context that it was presented, which is really funny considering the lashback and the feedback that the community gave to it.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm getting older. And so when I think about, what do I want my legacy to be? That's what I wanted to talk about. And that's why this is a little awkward, because I'm basically, opening myself up to everybody, and I've always been really proud of the garden spout, my grow shop, because I mean, number one, it was a successful business like overnight, and that's an accomplishment right away. And we taught so many people how to grow, and I've said before that I'm proud of how I taught OG growers that had been growing in the hills for years how to grow indoors. They wanted to, in the 80s, the enforcement camp was really rough, and they were just like busting people for growing outdoors. So people were chased inside, and these people that had grown forever wanted to grow indoors. And I remember them saying, well, I dug up my soil from my yard and put it in a pot, and I put these plants in it under those lights you sold me, and they just died. Like that type of stuff was like every single day. And you may be like, oh, those people were idiots. No, they weren't idiots. They just didn't know. They knew about plants, but they knew about growing plants outside. You know what I mean? And yeah, so I'm so proud of that, and now I'm really proud of what I'm doing with you and the Craft Growers Network. I feel like
Yeah.
we're providing entertaining content as well as educational content. And I'm not going to speak so much about how educational it is when I speak, but if you guys check out the Way We Grow podcast, which I have absolutely nothing to do with, I think I've been a guest on it and a guest host a couple of times, but this is Nick's show. It's so educational listening to like the way all these people grow, the way we grow, and so and the other day I was at a grow shop and somebody I did not know came up to me and said, "Hey," he's like, "Hey, listen, excuse me, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted you to know how much I love your podcast." And that like hit me like the first time somebody smoked my herb and told me it was good. Like it was like validation because it was beyond the text messages, and even people that I've communicated with, like, because people say it to me all the time after I'm talking to them and stuff. But like when somebody you don't know walks up to you and says that, I don't want to say like it was like a movie star moment, but it was like it really made me feel good. It made me feel proud. And I'm like, if this is my legacy, that's fucking awesome.
Yes.
And
That's
so
something to
like
be proud of.
there's 143 people listening, and I want to say thank you for making me feel like we're doing something awesome here.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
yeah,
like
thanks
that's
to all
so.
the listeners. It's extremely important. You are all the reason why we keep doing this. And I think one of the things Gabby doesn't talk about is he is crazy busy all the time doing his clones, and like where he does his clones, he helps upkeep another person's entire cloning program for commercial space. Then on top of that, he has a family and a life outside of all that. And I, for myself, I manage a grow and I do this podcast and I have a life outside of it. So we're both very busy individuals, and we do all of the recording and editing. And we've gotten Gabby's dad to start help with some editing here and there, which is awesome. But in the end, it's really just the two of us doing all this. So
Now
for
we just
anybody
did
that
this shit
supports
live.
us,
Now
yeah,
we
now we
just did
just
this
did it
shit live,
live.
so we can't even edit shit
We
out.
we
It's
can't
just
even
like
edit it,
it's
but
done. I
it
always
is
had
what it
that
is at
safety
this
net. If
point.
I say something really stupid, we can cut it out. But now we don't even
But
have
not
that
now.
safety net.
Not now. Yeah, but really,
So,
thank you
and
to all the listeners.
yeah, for real. And then I wanted to add, I'm really excited and proud of this opportunity that I have that's growing with the Mothership Labs and, with Jesse. And I feel like, you know, I'm learning tissue culture techniques, and we are going to teach people how to do tissue culture. And we're going to offer all sorts of services from preservation and dissection. And so, yeah. So these are things that I feel like I can be proud of and are my legacy. And, you know, the whole sour diesel thing, it's a fucking joke, and like anybody that thinks it's anything more than that, I'm like trying to make something out of it, doesn't, just didn't get it,
Yeah.
so
No, I
anyway,
think
that's what I wanted to say on that
yeah,
subject.
that's the touchy end to our first live ever. So, yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up then. All the community that's here with us today, thank you guys for joining us, and your questions are appreciated and your support of this channel is appreciated. We should have more opportunities for you to support this channel in the near future with we've announced it before, but we'll say it again. Gabby and I are working on a breeding project, and then there's going to be more integration into Gabby's website with his clones, and the seeds that we're making for that. And so there's going to be other ways that you can help support this channel. But thank you all for at least taking the time today to stay with us. Some of you have been here for 3 hours now, which is awesome. So yeah, thank you. And Gabby, is there any closing words that you have for the community, for the audience?
No, um I think I've said it all. The biggest thing was I wanted to say thank you guys for the support. And you know I don't know how many people have been listening the whole time, but 3 hours deep almost, and there's 140 people listening. It feels good. And, I know this video is going to reach a whole ton of people. And yeah, it's exciting. Like I said, I'm back to doing what I love, which is teaching people about growing. I think
Yep.
that's I think that's the last thing that I wanted to leave this with, because, like I said, I was a little bit high when we started the talk. But back when I did the garden spout, I realized how much I loved teaching people about growing. And you guys should have seen me and Not So Dog. Like, my grow shop, we had a coffee bar, and I'd make my customers a coffee and espresso, and we'd sit down and we'd talk about what's going on in their garden. And today, like, we're kind of doing the same thing, and it's it's what I love. I love talking about what's going on in our garden and the way we grow. And you know, I'm still learning, and having these conversations with you, makes me think about things like the dip and grow, like not changing it out every strain. I change my scissors out every strain. Why wouldn't I change the dip and grow every strain?
Yeah.
Dip and grow is a chemical that I'd be just throwing. Like, I hate using it at all. You know, We were talking about the aloe before, about how well people say that it helps them root their plants and it doesn't, works better than rooting hormone. If that's true, you know what? Even if I get acceptable results with it, that would be good enough.
Yeah.
I hate using this shit, So, I mean, I know we're going to use it in like tissue culture and stuff like that, but that's different,
Yeah.
So if we don't need to use it, we don't. So
Well,
anyway,
I mean, well, we'll talk more about that when the tissue culture episode comes,
and
and
definitely have Jesse involved in that one.
we will. And yeah, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll also get this out there on the other streaming services that we use. If you have friends or anybody that just likes to listen to the audio style podcast, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I think YouTube or no, Amazon Podcasts, and you can pretty much find us on any of them through our RSS feed. So yeah, join us next time, and we'll be talking about probably veg seedlings and mother plants. All right, that's
See
it.
ya.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.